Hear me? This is what happens on a live stream. So I think my mic's on now. You should be able to hear me now. Um, this is only the second time we've gone live on this channel, and it's freaky. It's always freaky. But we're going to get into some stories. It'll be great. It's not pre-recorded, so this is a flat that's in operation. Alex will be getting up in a bit. You'll probably hear him. I have a friend through who's going to let himself out when he's finished through there. But we'll get into these stories. So I want to show you this book a wee bit. Am I able to do that? Is it going to let me? So this is the book that we're going to be getting into today. The Scottish stories from it. It's Satan's Invisible World Discovered, which is an excellent title for a book anyway. It was originally published in 1685 by a George Sinclair, who just really wanted everyone to be aware that there were witches in the world. The devil was playing games all the time. You had to watch for it. That's all the poltergeists and witches were, was Satan making himself known to folk. So this was the original title page from the original publication. So we have Satan's Invisible World Discovered, or a choice collection of modern relations, proving evidently against the Sadducees and atheists of this present age that there are devils, spirits, witches, and apparitions from authentic records, attestations of famous witnesses, and undoubted verity. To all which is added that marvellous history of Major Weir and his sister, with two relations of apparitions at Edinburgh. Now, we're not going to go into Major Weir's story because we did that on our previous live stream a couple of years ago. So this is what we're getting into today. We are going to start with relation one. We're really only just doing the Scottish stories. Now, he does do stories from Holland. There are stories from throughout England. So if you're interested in reading the whole book for yourself, I would urge you to do so. It is an excellent book. But here we're just going to be going through the stories that came from Scotland, because it is the random Scottish history after all. So what's weird about this book is that 1685, when it was published, was right at the end of the witch trials. People weren't quite as believing as they used to be, which is why I think he published it. He wanted people to remain scared of these people and what Satan was allowing them to do, the mischief that Satan was allowing them to play within the world. And they were able to annoy their neighbours and kill folks' livestock, curse people, etc. And he wanted people to just be aware, be on your guard against these people, while the rest of the world was going, I'm not sure we should really be strangling and drowning and burning the people we have been. I think we're kind of done with that now. So this comes at the end of an era. And what we're not going to talk about is the stories that come in the appendix to the book, which really outlay how it was just women and people that were being murdered. It was judicial murder. It was, yeah, just sanctioned killing off of the people that communities found to be a wee bit iffy, maybe not on the same wavelength as the majority of the group, or whatever they gave their reasons to be. So we're going to get into this. Now we have relation one. This is the Touching the Troubles, which Sir George Maxwell of Pollock met with from the Devil and his Hags. Now, this was sent to the author from a John Maxwell, who includes a preface letter, just describing what it is he's about to outlay. So this is dated Pollock, the 24th of June, 1684. Sir, I send you here with the true account my father caused me write from his own mouth, which is the surest relation I can give, either of his own trouble or what concerns Janet Douglas, the first discoverer of these pictures. There fell out some less material circumstances in the family during her abode there, whereby it fully appeared that she knew what was done in distant places and understood languages. For instance, when a chapter in the Greek New Testament was read, she made us understand by signs what the purposes were. For all that time, she was dumb, whether really or counterfeitly, it's hard to determine, and did exactly give an account to myself what we did at 2 miles distance from the place where she was, without any information given to her which I know of. And rest your affectionate friend, John Maxwell. And he goes into his relation here. Upon the 14th of October, 1676, my father was surprised at Glasgow in the night time with a hot and fiery distemper, and coming home the next day, he was fixed to his bed. The physician, fearing a pleurisy and a fever, opened a vein, and the application of medicaments being made, the fiery heat was abated. He remaining for 7 weeks together under a great pain, chiefly in his right side, though not fixed to his bed. There had come to Pollock town a young dumb girl, but from whence was not known, who had remained there for 4 weeks before, but seldom frequenting Sir George Maxwell's house, till at length she came to some more familiarity and converse with his two daughters, and having observed Sir George sick and weak in his body, she signified unto them that there was a woman whose son had broke his fruit yard that did prick him in the sides. And seeing this woman one day in the hall of Pollock amongst a great many other company, she assured his daughters that this was the woman. And my friend. And the day following, she told the gentlewoman that this woman, whose name was Janet Mathy, relict of John Stuart, relict his widow, under Miller in Shaw Mill, had formed a wax picture with pins in the side, which was to be found in her house in a hole behind the fire, offering to bring it unto them, providing she was accompanied with men to protect her from violence. At first they hardly understood her, till she went to one of the gentlewomen's closets, and bringing thence a little bee-wax, she applied it before the fire, showing the dimensions and quantities of the picture. The gentlewomen not regarded the information because they thought it fabulous, yet his two servants, Lawrence Pollock and Andrew Martin, knowing how much the girl loved their master, and knowing that his life was in hazard if this picture were not found, resolved at all adventure to try whether the information were true or false, and therefore going alongs with her to the said Janet Matthey's house, one of them planted himself on the one side of the fire, and the other on the other side, while in the meantime the little girl, coming quickly by Lawrence Pollock, putteth her hand in the hole behind the fire, and then slips into Andrew Martin, beneath his cloak, the waxen effigy, which had two pins in it, one in each side, but that in the right side so long as to pierce through to the other, that in the left was not so long, nor so deeply thrust in. This picture being brought to Pollock, Sir George, his son, without acquainting his father, apprehended Janet Matthey, procuring the next day the Lord Ross his order for conveying her to prison, she being interrogate touching the picture. After several subterfuges, alleges it was the deed of the dumb girl. It was also inquired whether Sir George or his lady had given her at any time provocation to this malice, but it was well known they had been courteous to her, and upon her complaints had rebuked for some spreading bad reports upon her name, as not appearing sufficiently well founded to a conviction. Only upon the 14th of October, above specified, before Sir George went to Glasgow, he had called before him a servant in Pollock town that had broken his orchard in harvest last, who confessed the fact that Hugh Stewart, a son of Janet Matthey, was his accomplice, but a bystander declared that he was not now in Pollockland, but in the Darnley, to whom Sir George replied, "I hope my fingers may reach him in Darnley." This was all which could be thought a provocation to Matthey, no harm being done in the meantime to her son, whom Sir George, to his whom Sir George to this hour doth not so much as know by the face, but hath suffered him all the time of his sickness to live in his mother's house, ever since her imprisonment. In the meantime, Matthew, remaining obstinate, was searched for insensible marks before the Sheriff Deputy of Renfrew, and many famous witnesses at Paisley, and very many found upon her. So insensible marks was your witch pricker would come around and he would literally stab you all over your body with a pin, and anywhere that was stabbed where you didn't flinch or didn't bleed, you couldn't feel it. That was considered an insensible mark, and that was indication that you were one of Satan's minions, really. After the finding of the picture of wax foresaid, there was some abatement of Sir George his sickness, but not to any observable degree. So low was he brought, but upon the 4th of January following, his sickness recurred with that violence that for 4 or 5 days his friends and relations had no great confidence of his life. But they were more amazed on the 7th of January, being the Sabbath day, when they had an express from the dumb girl, who was at Pollock Town, but could not get over the water to the house, the river being so swelled at that time, signifying that John Stuart, Matthew's eldest son, had 4 days since formed an effigy of clay for taking away Sir George his life, and when she was called for, she declared it was in his house beneath the bolster among the bed straw. The next day following, James Dunlop of Househill and Ludowick Stewart of Achenhood, with some of Sir George his servants and tenants, went to Stuart's house, taking the little girl with them, resolving to make a very exacted trial, that it might not be said that the dumb girl had brought anything hither. Wherefore they caused John Stuart himself to light a candle and hold it, while Ludwig Stewart and another did in his sight lift the clay effigy from among the bed straw beneath the bolster, the little girl all the while standing at a distance from the place. But the picture having been made only 3 or 4 days before, and not sufficiently hard, did break into 2 pieces. In it were 3 pins, one in each side and one in the breast. Stuart had nothing to say for himself, but that he knew not who had put that thing there. He was instantly apprehended, and so was a little sister of his, lately entered into the 14th year of her age, named Annabel Stuart, who was said to have whispered before somewhat of the waxen effigy. This poor creature proved thereafter, through God's favour, a key to the detection of making both the pictures. At first she was very obstinate, but the next day she confessed, that being present in her brother's house the 4th of January, while the clay picture was formed, the black gentleman being present, which was the name she gave the devil, together with Bessie Weir, Marjorie Craig, Margaret Jackson, and her brother John. But when confronted with her brother, she did not with confidence adhere to her confession. Upon the finding of this picture, Sir George did very observably recover in his health, and all the pain which was in his side did by degrees wear away. John Stuart remained, notwithstanding his sister's confession, above measure obstinate, until he was searched the next day for insensible marks, whereof he had great plenty. At the finding whereof he was so confounded, that immediately he confessed his paction with the devil, and almost all the other heads expressed in his judicial confession after written, and declared that his complices, who formed the effigy with him, were the same his sister had named. She also came to a free and full confession of her paction with the devil, and her accession to the forming both of the waxen picture in her mother's house and of the clay in her brother's house. He's surprised that he's not feeling the stabbing of the pin, but they would have trick pins, these witch finders. So they would literally have pins where they could make it a certain way so that it stayed out and they could feel it and be like, yes, I feel this hurts. But if they made it a different way, it was like a trick pin where it would retract into it. So it would look like it's stabbing a person, but they're not feeling anything because they're not really being stabbed. Upon information of the premises, the Earl of Dundonald and the Lord Ross granted a warrant for apprehending Bessie Weir, Margaret Jackson and Marjorie Craig, who had been fellow sisters in the foresaid sorcery. Margaret Jackson, a woman aged about fourscore of years, after a day or two confessed paction with the devil and her accession to the making of both the pictures, and condescended upon the accomplices above named. Many insensible marks were found on her body. Upon the 17th of January last, a third portrait of clay was found under Janet Matthey's bolster in the prison house of Paisley, which the dumb girl had given information of, but it seemed to be the picture of some woman and probably of some of the family of Pollock. For Annabel Stewart did freely declare that their malice was against the whole family of Pollock. For turning to young Pollock and his lady, she said, and against you also. This portrait was found before four famous witnesses. So these are like voodoo dolls, but they're made of clay rather than the soft voodoo dolls you would think made of putty that you can stick your pins in and what have you. In America, these things were called poppets by those that were got in the Salem witch trials. The lords of His Majesty's Privy Council, being informed of pictures and effigies, the depositions of three confessing witches being sent, did grant a commission for their trial, and also for the trial of the other three that were obstinate. And in regard of the singularity of the case, they ordered the process to be very solemn, commissioning for the trial some judicious gentlemen in the country, viz. Sir Patrick Goston of Goston, James Brisbane of Bishopton, Sir John Shaw younger of Greenock, and John Anderson younger of Dub Hill, to whom they asked Mr. John Preston, advocate, a gentleman well seen in criminals, and who exercised the office of a justice deputy for several years, a sine qua non in the commission, and that the whole process might be more exact, they appointed George Lord Ross assessor, with power to vote and decide, and further ordered Mr. Robert Martin, clerk to the Justice Court, to be clerk to the process, which was to be recorded in the public books of a journal. The commissioners of justiciary held their first court at Paisley, the 27th of January, before whom Annabel Stewart deponed that in harvest last the devil in the shape of a black man had come to her mother's house and required the deponent to give herself up to him, and that the devil promised she should not want anything that was good, that being enticed by her mother, Janet Matthey, and Bessie Weir, who was officer to their several meetings, she did put her one hand to the crown of her head and the other to the sole of her foot, and give up herself, soul and body, whose seal here is bad seal, to the devil, that her mother promised her a new coat for the doing of it. There you go. That the new name the devil gave her was Anipe, that he took her by the hand and nipped her arm, which continued to be sore for the space of half an hour, that the devil in the shape of a black man lay with her in the bed under the clothes, that she found him cold, that thereafter he placed her nearest to himself, that she was present in her mother's house where the picture of wax was made, and that it was made to represent Sir George Maxwell of Pollock, that the black man, Janet Matthey, her mother, whose name was, from the devil, Landslady, Bessie Weir, whose name was Sofa, Marjorie Craig, whose new name was Rigaroo, Margaret Jackson, whose new name was Locus, were all present at the forming and making of the said effigy, that they bound it on a spit and turned it about before the fire, and that it was turned by Bessie Weir, saying as she turned it, Sir George Maxwell, Sir George Maxwell, which was expressed by all of them, that this picture was made in October last. That upon the 3rd day of January following, Bessie Weir came to her mother's house and advertised her to come to her brother John Stewart's house the following night by 12 o'clock in the night, and that accordingly she came to the place where she found Bessie Weir, Marjorie Craig, Margaret Jackson, and her brother John Stewart, a man with black clothes and a blue band, and white handcuffs, with hoggers on his feet, and that his feet were cloven, that she sat down at the fireside with them, where they made a picture of clay and placed pins in the breast and in the sides, that they did put the pins into the picture of wax, but is not sure who did thrust them into the picture of clay, that the pictures produced are the pictures she saw made, that the black man's name is Edgewell. Maybe a name the devil gave himself to, who knows. This declaration was made before famous witnesses, subscribed by two notes public for her, Robert Park Younger, Patrick Carswell in Paisley, and subscribed by the commissioners. John Stuart did judicially depone before the justices that upon the 3rd day of January instant, Bessie Weir in Pollocktown came to him late at night, he being without doors at his own house, that she did intimate unto him that there was a meeting to be had at his house the next night, and that the devil in the shape of a black man, Margaret Jackson, Marjorie Craig, and the said Bessie Weir were to be present, and that Bessie Weir required him to be present, which he promised to do. That the next night, after he had gone to bed, the black man came in and called him quietly by his name, upon which he arose from his bed and put on his clothes. That Margaret Jackson, Bessie Weir, and Marjorie Craig did enter in at the window in the gavel of his house, and that the first thing which the black man required was that he should renounce his baptism and deliver himself up wholly unto him, putting one of his hands on the crown of his head and the other to the sole of his foot, and that he was tempted hereunto by the devil, promising he should not want any pleasure, and that he should get his heart scythe on all that should do him wrong, that the new name given to him by the devil was Jonas, that thereafter the devil required every one of their consents for the making an effigy of clay for taking away the life of Sir George Maxwell of Pollock, to revenge the taking of his mother, Janet Matthew, that every one of the persons above named did give their consent to the making of the said effigy, and that they wrought the clay, and that the black man did make the figure of the head and face, and the two arms to the said effigy, that the devil set 3 pins in the same, one in each side and one in the breast, and that the man said, John did hold the candle all the while the picture was a-making, that he observed one of the black man's feet to be cloven, and that the black man's apparel was black, and that he had a blue band about his neck, and white handcuffs. It's not going to be like handcuffs, it's going to be like the cuffs of a shirt, I think they're talking about. And that he had hoggers upon his legs without shoes, and that the black man's voice was hollow and ghostly, that after they had begun to the forming of the picture, his sister Annabel, a child of 13 or 14 years of age, came knocking to the door, and she being let in by him, stayed with them a considerable time, but that she went away before the rest, he having opened the door unto her, that the rest went out at the window through which they entered, that the picture was placed by Bessie Weir in his bed straw, further confessed that he had envy and malice against the said Sir George, her quarrel being, as he conceived, that Sir George had not entered her husband to his harvest service, that the effigy was made upon the 4th of January last, and the devil's name amongst them was Edgewell, that the new name given to himself was Jonas, and Bessie Weir, her name, who was officer, was Sofa, that Margaret Jackson's name from the devil was Locust, and that his sister's name was Anape, but doth not remember what Marjorie Craig's name was. This confession had the same solemnities which the former had. It's got to have been torture that's making these people cop to all of these individual moments, hasn't it? Like, there's no way anyone's going to come in and go, oh yeah, like, I did this thing with my head and my foot, and suddenly I was like a servant of the devil, and he came and took me to bed, and yeah, like, then he had us make pictures out of like wax and clay, and like, who's admitting, especially in these days when you're not just going to get a bit of a laugh and aye, okay, pal, you're going to get murdered if you're admitting to these things, like, the torture must have been terrible anyway, if this is the way they saw their escape. Margaret Jackson did the same, judicially confess that she was present at the making of the first effigy, which was made in Janet Matthew's house in October last, and that the devil in the shape of a black man, Janet Matthew, Bessie Weir, Marjorie Craig, and Annabel Stewart were present at the making of the said effigy, which was made to represent Sir George Maxwell of Pollock for taking away his life, that 40 years since, or thereby, she was in Pollockshaw's croft with some few sticks on her back, that the black man came to her, and that she did give up herself to him from the top of her head to the sole of her foot, having first renounced her baptism, and that the new name she had from the devil was Locus, that about the 3rd or 4th of January last, or thereby, in the night time, when she had wakened, she found a man in the bed whom she supposed had been her husband, who had died 20 years before, or thereby, and that the man did immediately disappear, and that this man was the devil, and that this was the first time she knew him, that upon Thursday the 4th of January last she was present in the house of John Stuart at night, when and where the effigy of clay was made, and that she saw the black man's clothes were black, and that he had white handcuffs, and that Bessie Weir in Pollocktown, and Annabel Stuart in Shaw's, and Marjorie Craig were present the first said time and place at the making of the foresaid effigy of clay, that she gave her consent to the making of the same, and that the devil who had appeared in the shape of a black man, his name was Edgewell. This confession had the same solemnities which the two former had. I mean, it's just the same, the same, the same, isn't it? These people are just, I think they've got the story from one, and the way that they're getting everyone adhering to the same story is they're going to have been asking leading questions. So and so said this. Is this correct? Did you actually do this? Oh, did she say that? Oh, then yeah, we must have done that. What was your name? Oh, I don't know. What was her name? Oh, she says her name was this. Right. Okay. Well, I'll not say that next time. Just I don't know. It would be interesting to see these trials in the same way as you see interrogations these days. I think we would be horrified from the get-go, like from minute one. Upon the 15th of February, 1677, the justices being convened again in court at Paisley, John Stuart and Annabel Stuart, with Margaret Jackson, did adhere to their former judicial confession, but Janet Matthew, Bessie Weir, and Marjorie Craig did obstinately deny. One remarkable passage there was concerning Janet Matthew. The justice, upon the 27th of January, commanded the jailer to fix her feet in the stocks, that she might not do violence to her own life. Yeah, there were a number of them that didn't make it to the pyre. The man declared that the next morning he found her bolster, which the night before was laid at least 6 yards distant from the stocks, now placed beneath her, the stocks being so heavy that two of the strongest men in the country could hardly have carried them 6 yards. He, wondering, did ask her how she had wind to the bolster. She answered that she had creaked along the floor of the room, drawing the stocks to the same place, and before the court, she said, she had gotten 1 foot free out of the hole, and with the other had drawn the stocks, a thing altogether impossible, the stocks being so weighty, nor she able to take her foot out of the hole. I think someone's done her a favour and she doesn't want to get them in trouble, maybe. The justices, having examined all witnesses in matters of fact touching the effigies, Sir George, his sickness, and the recovery of his health upon the finding of the same, considering also the bad fame of those who were obstinate in having confronted them with the confessing witches, who in their faces avowed their accession in manner expressed in the confession above written, considering lastly all other circumstances of their case, committed them to the trial of a judicious inquest, who, being found guilty, were condemned to the fire to be burnt, and their effigies with them. Only Annabel, in regard of her non-age, she wasn't old enough, and the evidences she seemed to give of her penitence, was reprieved by the order of council, but to remain in prison. In the meantime, both she and her brother John did seriously exhort their mother to confession. Really? Why they're okay. And with tears did Annabel put her in mind of the many meetings she had with the devil in her own house, and that a summer's day would not be sufficient to relate what passages she had seen between the devil and her, but nothing could prevail with her abjured and hardened heart. It is to be noted the dumb girl, whose name was Janet Douglas, doth now speak, not very distinctly, yet so as she may be understood, and is a person that most wonderfully discovers things past, and doth also understand the Latin tongue, which she never learned. The weirdest bit about that story is the fact that the dumb girl, Janet Douglas, wasn't done for a witch. She's literally telling the people he's ill because they made an effigy and it's hidden here. Well, how do you know that? Well, I just know it, right? Okay. She's discovering things past. She knows a history that maybe she shouldn't be acquainted with. She understands the Latin tongue, which she's apparently never learned. These are things that the witches could do. They could see things in far places. They could discern the future. They could tell what's in someone's past without being given the information, apparently. They could speak languages and understand languages that they hadn't learned. These were these were ticks in the boxes of women that were burned as witches. Yet this girl, because I guess she's using these powers to discover witches, is getting away with it. She's just absolved. She's fine. She can continue. Just there is a lot of contradictions at this time. I mean, you think of faith healers now. They had faith healers back in these days, the laying of hands to heal a person. Witches were burned for healing people, you know, because it was considered to be knowledge that they maybe weren't supposed to have. But then you think if you're helping a person, why am I being burned? I saved that girl's life, you know, like I don't know. Anyway, so yes, we have that story. I want to go to the comments because I haven't been able to pay attention to you, and I want to say hi to people. So we've got Stephen and Colin and Simon and Alistair and Aki's is on. Oh my goodness. Hello to everyone. I'm so glad you are here. Wolf Pet's here. How are you, darling? We've got, oh my goodness, loads of people saying hi to each other. If you've got questions too, like by all means, stick your questions in the chat, and I'll see if I can answer. I know Colin likes to ask the odd question during the 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 streams, you know. For pronouncing your name properly, do people not say Colin properly? How else are you able to say Colin? Hi, Suzanne. It's nice to have you here too, darling. Um, oh, Alistair's away. All right. See you later, Alistair. We'll catch up with you later, darling. We could be here for a while. Colon, like the physical feature, a colon. That's quite demeaning. I'm sorry. People shouldn't call you colon. I mean, it's obviously Colin. I mean, that's what it looks like. So, yeah, I'm sorry, darling, that you're getting that from people. Um, hopefully, if they see this, they'll know in future. Like, hopefully, it works. So we're going to get on to our next story, shall we? We've got the witchcraft of Agnes Simpson. So, okay, we'll just get into it. Screw it. Though this be of too old a date to comply with the title of our stories, yet being a true copy of records so authentic, though not so fresh, it may haply not be amiss briefly to name some effects, kinds, and circumstances of her sorcery, as her skill in diseases, that the sickness of William Black was an elf shot, her taking the sick parties, pains, and sicknesses upon herself for a time, and then translating them to a third person, her usage of long scriptural prayers and rhymes containing the main points of Christianity, so that she may seem to have been not so much of a white witch as an holy woman, Her using of such nonsensical rhymes for the instructing of ignorant people and teaching them to pray, as these two prayers, the black and white paternoster in metre in set forms to be used morning and evening, and at other times when occasion offered. So we have first the white paternoster, which runs, God was my foster, he fostered me under the book of palm tree. Saint Michael was my dame, he was born at Bethlehem, he was made of flesh and blood. God send me my right food and dine too, that I may to yon kirk go to read upon yon sweet book, which the mighty God of heaven shoop. Open heaven's gates, steek hell's gates, all saints be the better, bear the white prayer paternoster. Yate is gate in Old Scots. Shoop, I don't know what shoop is, but there it's a wee rhyme. Now these you'll see in sometimes old recipes and especially in old medicines. So it will say that you're to take a thing and you're to grind it or mix it or do something with it while saying maybe the Lord's Prayer 3 times, or saying 5 Hail Marys, or singing little rhymes like these. And the reason for that wasn't because they thought that saying the Lord's Prayer, the Hail Marys, or whatever, was going to get God to make the thing work. It's because the length of time it took to say that was the length of time a thing needed to be done for. That people didn't just have watches and they couldn't time themselves doing things. So these rhymes, because they were at a certain pace, they were used to stir a thing or cook a thing or do something for X amount of time. That was the purpose of those. The black paternoster runs thus. 4 nukes in this house for Haley angels, a post in the midst, that's Jesus Christ. 4 nukes in this house for Halley angels, a post in the midst, that's Christ Jesus, Lucas, Marcus, Matthew, Joannes, God be into this house and all that belongeth. So these don't sound like witchy. These sound like Christian prayers, really. These are with an intention of getting some kind of blessing on yourself, your family, your house, etc. But when she sought for an answer from the devil upon any occasion, he appeared to her in the shape of a dog. But the way of dismissing and conjuring him to go was thus: I charge thee to depart on the law thou lives on, as she did when she dismissed him, after her consulting him about the old Lady Edmiston's sickness. But the manner how she raised the devil was with these words: Elva, come and speak to me, who came in the likeness of a dog, her sailing with her comers and fellow witches in a boat to a ship is very remarkable, where the devil caused her and them to drink good wine and beer without money, she neither seeing the mariners nor the mariners her. And after all, the devil raised a wind whereby the ship perished. Her baptizing and using other ceremonies upon a cat, with other witches, to hinder Queen Anne from coming into Scotland, her raising of a spirit to conjure a picture of wax for destroying Mr. John Mosscrop. But to be more particular, I shall give you her own confession to King James. Item filed in convict of Sameckle, the same, that the devil in man's likeness met her going out to the fields from her own house at Keith, betwixt 5 and 6 at even, being alone, and commanded her to be at North Berwick Kirk the next night, to which place she came on horseback, conveyed by her goodson called John Cooper, and lighted at the kirkyard, or a little before she came to it, about 11 hours at even. They danced along the kirkyard, Gaily Duncan playing on a trump, and John Fane Musseld led the ring. The said Agnes and her daughter followed next. The writing of this is very strange, just so you understand why I'm struggling just every so often. It's the spelling and the way this is written. They danced along the kirkyard, gaily Duncan playing on a trump and John Fane Musseld led the ring. The said Agnes and her daughter followed next. Besides, there were Kate Grey and George Mollis, his wife, Robert Grierson, Catherine Duncan, Bessie Wright and Isabel Gilmore, John Greymale, Duncan Buchanan, Thomas Barnhill and his wife, Gilbert McGill, John McGill, Catherine McGill, with the rest of their comers, above 100 persons, whereof there were 6 men, and all the rest women. The women made first their courtesy to their maester, and then the men. The men turning 9 times widdershins about, widdershins is clockwise, and the women 6 times. John Fane blew up the kirk doors and blew in the lights, which were like mickle black candles sticking round about the pulpit. The devil started up himself in the pulpit like a meikle black man in collar row. Everyone answered, Here. Mr. Robert Grierson named. They all ran hurdy-gurdy and were angry, for it was promised he should be called Robert the Comptroller, alias Rob the Roarer, for expreming of his name. The first thing he demanded was if they kept all promise and had been good servants, and what they had done since the last time they had convened. At his command they opened up 3 graves, 2 within and 1 out of the kirk, and cutted off from the dead corpse the joints of their fingers, toes, and knees, and parted them amongst them. And the said Agnes Simpson got for her part a winding sheet and 2 joints. The devil commanded them to keep the joints upon them while they were dry, and then to make a powder of them to do evil withal. Then he commanded them to keep his commandments, which were to do all the evil and mischief they could. Before they departed and were dismissed, they behoved it to kiss his arse with reverence to the reader. He wants to really forgive. You wants you to forgive him for having to write arse, since it's actually in the judicial text. He had on him an gown and an coat, which were both black, and they that were assembled part stood and part sat. John Fane was ever nearest the devil at his left elbow. Greymale keeped the door. That which is observable in John Fane is that the devil appeared to him not in black, but in white raiment, but proposed as hellish a covenant to him as those fiends that appear in black. His skimming on the sea in a boat is remarkable, with those of his complices, and his foretelling the leak in the Queen's ship by the help of the devil. His raising winds with the rest, when the king sailed into Denmark, by casting a cat into the sea, which the devil delivered to them, and taught them to cry Hola when they first cast it in. His raising a mist at the king's return from Denmark by getting Satan to cast a thing like a football, it appearing to John like a wisp, into the sea, which made a reek to rise, whereby the king's majesty might be cast upon the coast of England. His opening of locks by sorcery is won by mere blowing into a woman's hand while he sat by the fire. His embarking in a boat with other witches, and all of them sailing over the sea and entering within a ship, and drinking good wine and ale there, and sinking the ship when they had done with the persons in it. His kissing Satan's arse, with reverence, again in brackets, again at another conventicle. His being swiftly carried above in the air in chasing of a cat to catch her, to cast into the sea, thereby to raise winds, according to the prescription of Satan. His pretending to tell any man how long he should live, if he told him but the day of his birth. Yeah. So James the 6th went over to Denmark, got his wife, Anne, came back for Denmark. Now, on his way back, apparently only his boat hit troubles, and they decided that that's witchcraft. The witch has got you, like, obviously. So on his return, he has a really sudden interest in witches because they've obviously made an attempt on his life, you know? And he writes his demonology, and it gets to the point where the witches that had apparently gone after him, Galis Duncan, Agnes Simpson, etc., were tried in front of him. They were brought into his presence, and he would ask them questions about how they had effected to create a storm, how they had raised the mist, uh, what songs they played. They had them play the songs, and just he got really involved, and they they didn't help matters. It certainly didn't save them. They made him feel like he was the be all and end all. He was the one being on earth that Satan was so scared of, that Satan hated so much, that he was going to send all of his witches to kill James VI, because here was this Christian pious man, exemplary gentleman, and the devil Satan hated that, and all that did was rile up James's ego. He loved that. That's why he had the witches come in and testify in front of him, because he's like, really? Me? Are you sure? Tell me more. Tell me all the ways in which you tried to get me, and all the ways in which Satan hates me. Tell me more about me, you know? That was the kind of guy he was. So, anyway, we'll have a wee look. I'm checking on the comments at the end of chapters. I want to make sure I'm not missing any. Like, what are you saying stop it for, Stephen? Americans pronounce it that way. I'm sorry, Colin. It's like my pal in Canada. Her name's Kirsty, but apparently everyone calls her Christy because it's more common over there. She come over here and she had to make a big point about how she was Kirsty, not Christy. It's like, no one's going to think you're Christy. It's Kirsty over here, like. She ended up changing the thing when she realized that it wasn't that weird. Simon says Chuck Berry. That's fair enough. That's very in line with what we're doing here. What have we got next? We have a remarkable story of discovered witchcraft at Lauder anno 1649, and of the wiles which the devil used in deceiving poor creatures. So shall we get into this one, shall we? In the beginning of the year 1649, a common report passing up and down in all men's and women's mouths of an eminent warlock, whose name was Robert Grieve, alias Hobgrieve, trafficking in these parts of the country and deceiving many simple people, he was at last discovered, apprehended, and imprisoned at the town of Lauder, and after long shiftings and denial, wherein he had learned of his hellish master to be most subtle by the great goodness of God, he was at length brought to a serious acknowledgment of his guilt, and confession of his being the devil's officer in that country, for warning all Satan's vassals to come to the meetings where and whensoever the devil required, for the space of 18 years and more. He acknowledged also that his wife, who 20 years or thereabout before was burnt at Lauder, was the occasion of his coming into that snare, for they being poor and having little or nothing to live upon, he began to grudge under that condition and to complain of his lot, which his wife perceiving, desired him not to be troubled, but shewed him that if he would follow her counsel, she should acquaint him with a gentleman who would teach him a way how to become rich. Never trust it. To which motion he hearkened, and at her desire went down with her to a haugh on Gallow Water, near to the Still, where she trysted the gentleman, and when they had come to that place and tarried a considerable space, seeing no body, he began to weary and tell her that he would be gone, but she pressing him to stay and assuring him that the gentleman would not fail her, at length there came a great mastiff, bigger than any butcher's dog, and a very black running upon him, which put him into such a confusion and astonishment of spirit, as that he knew not where he was. But his wife laboured to comfort him under that consternation, assuring him that the gentleman would come presently and perform what he had promised him. And Accordingly, in a short space the devil appeared in the shape of a black man, and fitting his discourse to the man's tension, made many promises to him, that if he would become his servant, he would teach him ways, how to be rich, how to be much made of in all the country. Unto which demand of the devil he acknowledged that he consented to, not so much for any hopes of future riches, as for fear lest he should instantly be devoured by him. It's a very enough fear, for he suspected in the very meantime that it was the devil. He would have been correct there. And then he gave him that charge to be his officer, to warn all to the meetings, as was said before, in which church he continued for the space of 18 years and more, until he was apprehended. He was most ingenious in his confession, and great evidence whereof was this, that there was neither man nor woman delated by him, delated as accused by him, but were all confessors when apprehended and confronted with him, and died confessing. So we're saying that that's proof that his story is fact, is that when he pointed to people, when these people are witches, they've then been tortured and confessed to being witches. So it's obviously true. They confessed. So, he's telling the truth. One instance is remarkable and worthy of observation, which is this. After he had delated many, and as many of those were apprehended as a prison could conveniently contain, and the keepers attend, he gave up another woman in the town of Lauder, whose name the magistrates resolved to conceal for a time, till the prison should be emptied of some of those who were already apprehended and had confessed, and accordingly secrecy was engaged unto. But the devil came that same night unto her, and told her that Hobgreave had filed her for a witch, but assured her that if she would rise up and go and challenge him for it, and never come away till he and she were confronted, then he would deny it. Whereupon she arose and came to the prison window, and railed upon Hobgreave, calling him warlock and slave to the devil, and all evils which her mouth could utter. And when desired to go home by the sentries, and also by the magistrates, she sat down upon the Tolbooth stair, and said she should never go to her house till she and that slave to the devil were confronted. Whereupon the baillie came to the preacher, desiring him to come and speak to her, to desire her to go home to her house, for there were none accusing her, who accordingly came and entreated her to go home, but she obstinately refusing to go till she should be confronted with that rascal who had delated her, an honest woman, for a witch. The baillie was constrained to her desire, whereupon, many being present as witnesses, she was conveyed out of the prison to the room where Hobgreave was. And so soon as she came in his sight, she fell down upon her bare knees, and began to scold the man, and to accuse him of a lie in speaking of her name. Says she, Thou common thief, how dare thou for thy soul's say that ever before this time thou saw me, or I saw thee, or ever was in thy company, either alone or with others? All which language he heard very patiently, till he was desired by the baillie to speak, whereupon he asked her how she came to know that he had delated her for a witch. For, says he, surely none but the devil, thy old master, and mine, has told thee so much. She replied, The devil and thou perish together, for he is not my master, though he be thine. I defy the devil and all his works. Whereupon he says to her, What needs all this din? Dost thou not know that these many years I have come to thy house and warned thee to meetings, and thou and I have gone alongs together, and thee to meetings, and thereafter he condescended to her upon several places and actions done in these places by her and others, to all which I had said, I am, said he, a witness. By this she was so confounded that immediately in presence of the baillie, the preacher, the schoolmaster, and many witnesses, she cried out, Oh, now, says she, I perceive that the devil is a liar and a murderer from the beginning, for this night he came to me and bade me come and abuse thee, and never come away till I was confronted with thee. And he assured me that thou would deny all, and say thou false tongue thou lied. And having said this, she with many tears confessed, that it was all truth which he had said, and prayed the minister that he would entreat God for her poor soul, that she might be delivered out of the hands of the devil. Under this confession, she continued even unto the day of her death. Okay, so they're putting this story out as, look, it's obviously fact, like he's done the things, he's told us he's done the things, he's then told us she did the things, but we've not told anybody that he told us she did the things. So technically no one knew, but then she's apparently heard from the devil, oh, by the way, your name's been mentioned, you might want to go and sort that. It's like, aye, all right. So she goes to sort it and ends up got for witchcraft because where Hob Grieve was a bit of a smart cookie and turned it all round on her. I'm not sure why she would have agreed and complied and not just continued saying that it was all lies. But she's obviously given in, and he's got the better of her. So I assume the both of them are going to have been executed off the back of that. Another evidence of ingenuity in him was this, that after 5 or 6 men and women who he had delated were also convinced and had confessed their witchcraft, he earnestly desired that he and they might be taken to the church on the Lord's Day to hear the word of God, which being granted, and they conveyed with a guard to the church, all of them sat down together before the pulpit. The preacher lectured on these words, Mark 9:22, and ofttimes it hath cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him, etc. The father of the lunatic child complained to Christ of the devil's cruelty towards his son, and the preacher briefly noted that observation from the words, that whatever the devil did to such as he had gotten any power over, his aim and end was always to destroy the poor creature, both soul and body. Their sentence syntax of the former eras were weird. Apologies. This truth being seriously applied and spoken home by the preacher to the said Hob Grieve and the rest of the confessing witches and warlocks, they were all immediately so confounded that all of them cried out with a dreadful and lamentable noise, Alas, that is a most sure truth. Oh, what will become of us, poor wretches? Oh, pray for us. But Hobgrieve especially bare witness to that sad truth by a general declaration in the face of the congregation that he had experience of the truth thereof. For, said he, there is no trusting to his promises, for in Musselburgh water, when I had a heavy creel upon my back, he thought to have drowned me there, and since I came into prison, he did cast me into the fire to destroy me, as is well known to my present preacher and magistrates of the place, and many others, and concluded with an exhortation to all to beware of the devil, for whatever he says or doth, his purpose is to destroy you, and that you will find to be the end of his work, as we know to our doleful experience this day. Another evidence of the devil's art in studying the destruction of the poor creature was manifested in that same place, and that same place and year, 1649, a certain woman in the town of Lauder was filed, not by Hobgrieve, but by some other, and for a long time denied. The magistrates of the place for this cause were loath to meddle with her, but adjudged to death all the rest who had confessed, and ordained them to be burnt upon the Monday after. She hearing of this, and that she was to remain alone in prison without hopes of escape, was prompted by the devil to make up a confession in her own bosom, as she supposed might take away her life, and thereupon sent for the minister and made that confession of witchcraft, which she herself had patched up before witnesses, and in the close she earnestly entreated the magistrates and the ministers that she might be burnt with the rest upon Monday next. Her confession was that she had covenanted with the devil and had become his servant about 20 years before, when she was but a young lass, and that he kissed her and gave her a name, but since he had never owned her, and that she knew no more of the works of the devil, as she should answer to God, but what she said was true. That intelligent persons began to be jealous of the truth of that confession and began to suspect that out of the pride of her heart, in a desperate way, she had made up that confession to destroy her life, because she still pressed to be cut off with the rest upon Monday. Therefore, much pains was taken on her by ministers and others on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning, that she might resile from that confession, which was suspected to be but a temptation of the devil to destroy both her soul and body. Yea, it was charged home upon her by the ministers that there was just ground of jealousy. Huh? Jealousy? That her confession was not sincere, and she charged before the Lord to declare the truth, and not to take her blood upon her own head. Yet stiffly she adhered to what she had said, and cried always to be put away with the rest. Whereupon, on Monday morning, being called before the judges, and confessing before them what she formerly said, she was found guilty, and condemned to die with the rest that same day. But being carried forth to the place of execution, she remained silent during the first, second, and third prayer, and then perceiving that there remained no more but to rise and go to the stake, she lifted up her body, and with a loud voice cried out, "Now all you that see me this day know that I am now to die as a witch by my own confession, and I free all men, especially the ministers and magistrates, of the guilt of my blood. I take it wholly upon myself, my blood be upon my own head. And as I must make answer to the God of heaven presently, I declare I am as free of witchcraft as any child, but being delated by a malicious woman and put in prison under that name of a witch, disowned by my husband and friends, and seeing no ground of hope of my coming out of prison, nor ever coming in credit again, through the temptation of the devil, I made up that confession on purpose to destroy my own life, being weary of it, and choosing rather to die than live, and so died." Which lamentable story, as it did then astonish all the spectators, none of which could restrain themselves from tears, so it may be to all demonstration of Satan's subtlety, whose design is still to destroy all, partly by tempting many to presumption, and some others to despair. These things to be of truth are attested by an eye and ear witness who is yet alive, a faithful minister of the gospel. So that's why a lot of people committed suicide in the prison. You had the torture. There was, you'd have pins stuck in under your nails, have your nails wrenched off, you'd have teeth pulled out, you'd have hot pincers on your skin, like pulling at you. I mean, you've seen them in the dungeons and things that there are around the world, where they were strung up, their hands were behind their back, and they were strung up like that from the wrists, so that their shoulders would dislocate. They were crushed, they were stretched, they were the boots. The boots is the worst torture, and they seem to have been so prevalent in Scottish judiciary. The boots was it's like made of iron. And from what I gather, and I've tried to find as many sources I could about it because I really wanted to get a good idea when I first heard of these things. I really wanted to know like what exactly it was they were talking about. So it was like an iron boot, and your feet would be put in it. And this iron boot would have slits at the sides through which wooden wedges would be put. These wedges were smashed into the boots into your feet, and your feet and legs were crushed. I'll not give a description that was given in one of my articles, but you can understand how horribly that would disable somebody. And these people that know that they're innocent and they're undergoing all of this torture to make them effectively confess to lies and absurdity, they knew that just by dint of having that finger pointed at them, even if they got out of prison, there was always going to be that cloud over them. There's always going to be that suspicion. There's always going to be those people who, if something went wrong with their livestock or crops or butter churning or whatever, they were going to be the ones blamed. They were going to be side-eyed the rest of their lives. And a lot of them took their own lives in prison before actually being found guilty and going to the stake. In Scotland, it was common practice for the women to be strangled and then burnt at the stake. It doesn't seem that they were burned alive in Scotland. If at all, it's going to have been because the strangling maybe wasn't as effective as it should have been. They could be drowned as well. So, or hanged. But these people, you know, they had no options. They were out of options. They, I don't know. It's a shame. Stephen, you're away. Take care, darling. HR Puffin stuff, Ackies. HP Lovecraft. Yeah. HR Puffin stuff. American Kids Show with Witchy Poo. That was. I have no idea what that is, Ackies. What are you talking about, pal? I agree with Colin. I kind of thought you were maybe heading for HP Lovecraft there. With Pet, you're away. Take care, darling. We'll be here for a wee bit. Okay. So we are on to relation 11 now, which is the Devil of Glenluce enlarged with several remarkable additions from an eye and ear witness as a person of undoubted honesty. Before we get into that, we're going to have a short break because I feel like that would be nice. I can get myself a drink, etc. Stand up and stretch my bits. I'll be back in 5 minutes if you want to join me again. So let me put you on break momentarily. And we're back. So we're back with The Devil of Glenluce, enlarged with several remarkable additions from an eye and ear witness, a person of undoubted honesty. All right, let's find out how honest this was, shall we? So, this is that famous and notable story of the Devil of Glenluce, which I published in my Hydrostatics anno 1672, and which since hath been transcribed word by a learned pen, and published in the late book intituled Seducimus Triumphatus, whom nothing but the truth thereof and usefulness for refuting atheism could have persuaded to transcribe. The subject matter then of this story is a true and short account of the troubles wherewith the family of one Gilbert Campbell, by profession a weaver in the old parish of Glenluce in Galloway, was exercised. I have adventured to publish it de novo in this book, first because it was but huddled up among purposes of another nature, but now I have reduced it to its own proper place. Next, because this story is more full, and ends not so abruptly as the other did. We'll let him get into it, shall we? It happened, says my informer, Gilbert Campbell's son, who was then a student of philosophy in the College of Glasgow, that after one Alexander Agnew, a bold and sturdy beggar, who afterwards was hanged at Dumfries for blasphemy, had threatened to hurt to the family because he had not gotten such an alms as he required. The said Gilbert Campbell was oftentimes hindered in this exercise of his calling, and yet could not know by what means this was done. This Agnew, among many blasphemous expressions, had this one, when he was interrogated by the judges, whether or not he thought there was a God. He answered, he knew no God, but salt, meal, and water. When the stirs began first, there was a whistling heard both within and without the house, and Janet Campbell, going one day to the well to bring home some water, was conveyed with a shrill whistling about her ears, which made her say, I would fain hear thee speak as well as whistle. Hereupon it said, after a threatening manner, I'll cast thee, Lennet, into the well. The voice was most exactly like the damsel's voice, and did resemble it to the life. The gentlewoman that heard this, and was a witness, thought the voice was very near to her own ears, and said the whistling was such as children used to make with their small, slender glass whistles. If you heard supernatural whistling, ethereal whistling from, I don't know, I mean, is she hearing it in her head, or is it coming from about her? I don't know. Why would she assume it could talk? She's saying, I would rather hear you speak than have you whistle at me. That's a weird reaction to have, isn't it? I think that's a weird reaction to have. About the middle of November, the foul fiend came on with new and extraordinary assaults by throwing of stones in at the doors and windows and down the chimney head, which were of great quantity and thrown with force. Yet by God's providence there was not one person in the family that was hurt. This did necessitate Gilbert Campbell to reveal that to the minister of the parish and to some other neighbours and friends, which hitherto he had suffered secretly. Notwithstanding of this, his trouble was enlarged, for not long after he found oftentimes his warp and threads cut, as with a pair of scissors, and not only so, but their apparel were cut after the same manner, and even while they were wearing them, their coats, bonnets, hose, shoes, but could not discern how or what by what means. Only it pleased God to preserve their persons, that the least harm was not done. Yet in their night time they had not liberty to sleep, something coming and pulling their bedclothes and linens off them, and leaving their bodies naked. Next, their chests and trunks were opened, things in them strawed here and there. Likewise, the parts of their working instruments which had escaped were carried away and hid in holes and boards of the house, where hardly they could be found again. Nay, whatever piece of cloth or household stuff was in any part of the house, it was carried away, and so cut and abused that the goodman was necessitate in all haste and speed to remove and transport the rest to a neighbour's house, and he himself compelled to quite the exercise of his calling, quit the exercise of his calling, maybe, whereby he only maintained his family, yet he resolved to remain in his house for a season, during which time some persons about, not very judicious, counselled him to send his children out of the family here and there to try whom the trouble did most follow, assuring him that this trouble was not against the whole family, but against some one person or other in it, whom he too willingly obeyed. Yet for the space of 4 or 5 days there were no remarkable assaults as before. The minister, hearing thereof, shewed him the evil of such a course, and assured him that if he repented not and called back his children, he might not expect that his trouble would end in a right way. The children that were nigh by being brought home, no trouble followed, till one of his sons called Thomas, that was farthest off, came home. Then did the devil begin afresh, for upon the Lord's day following in the afternoon, the house was set on fire. But by the help of some neighbours going home from the sermon, the fire was put out, and the house saved, not much loss being done. And Monday, after being spent in private prayer and fasting, the house was again set on fire upon the Tuesday, about 9 o'clock in the morning. Yet by the speedy help of neighbours, it was saved, little scathe being done. Devil's fire raising. This random poltergeist is looking to bring the house down. The weaver, being thus vexed and wearied both day and night, went to the minister of the parish, an honest and godly man, desiring him to let his son Thomas abide with him for a time, who condescended, but withal assured him that he would find himself deceived. And so it came to pass, for notwithstanding that the lad was without the family means outside of the family, yet were they that remained in it sore troubled both in the daytime and night season, so that they were forced to wake till midnight, and sometimes all the night over, during which time the persons within the family suffered many losses, as the cutting of their clothes, the throwing of pyates, you know what pyates are? The pulling down of turf and field from the roof and walls of the house, and the stealing of their clothes, and the pricking of their flesh and skin with pins. Some ministers, about having convened at the place for a solemn humiliation, persuaded Gilbert Campbell to call back his son Thomas, notwithstanding of whatever hazard might follow. The boy returning home affirmed that he heard a voice speak to him, forbidding him to enter within the house or in any other place where his father's calling was exercised. Yet he entered, but was sore abused, till he was forced to return to the minister's house again. Upon Monday, the 12th of February, the rest of the family began to hear a voice speak to them, but could not well know from whence it came. Yet from evening till midnight, too much vain discourse was kept up with Satan, and many idle and impertinent questions proposed, without that due fear of God that should have been upon their spirits under so rare and extraordinary a trial. They came that length in familiar discourse with the foul thief, that they were no more afraid to keep up the clash with him than to speak to one another. In this in this they pleased him well, for he desired no better than to have sacrifices offered to him. The minister, hearing of this, went to the house upon the Tuesday, being accompanied with some gentlemen, one James Bailey of Kerfin, Alexander Bailey of Dinraget, Mr. Robert Hay, and a gentlewoman called Mistress Douglas, whom the minister's wife did accompany. At their first incoming, the devil says, Quum literarum is good Latin. These are the first words of the Latin rudiments which scholars are taught when they go to the grammar school. He cries again, a dog. The minister, thinking that he had spoken it to him, said he took it not ill to being reviled by Satan, since his master had trodden that path before him. Answered Satan, it was not you, sir, I spoke it to. I meant by the dog there, for there was a dog standing behind backs. This passing, they all went to prayer, which being ended, they heard a voice speaking out of the ground from under a bed in the proper country dialect, which he did counterfeit exactly, saying, "Would you know the witches of Glenluce? I will tell you them," and so related 4 or 5 persons that went under a bad report. The weaver informed the company that one of them was dead long ago. The devil answered and said, "It is true she is dead long ago, but her spirit is living with us in the world." The minister replied, saying, though it was not convenient to speak to such an excommunicate and intercommuned person, "The Lord rebuke thee, Satan, and put thee to silence. We are not to receive information from thee, whatsoever fame any person goes under. Thou art seeking but to seduce this family, for Satan's kingdom is not divided against itself." After which all went to prayer again, which being ended, for during the time of prayer no noise or trouble was made, except once that a loud fearful yowl was heard at a distance, the devil with many threatenings boasted and terrified the lad Tom, who had come back that day with the minister, that if he did not depart out of the house, he would set all on fire. The minister answered and said, "The Lord will preserve the house, and the lad too, seeing he is one of the family, and hath God's warrant to tarry in it." The fiend answered, "He shall not get liberty to tarry. He was once he was once put out already, and shall not abide here, though I should pursue him to the end of the world." The minister replied, "The Lord will stop thy malice against him." And then they all went to prayer again, which being ended, the devil said, "Give me a spade and a shovel, and depart from the house for 7 days, and I will make a grave and lie down in it, and shall trouble you no more." The good man answered, "Not so much as a straw shall be given thee, through God's assistance, even though that would do it." The minister also added, "God shall remove thee in due time." The spirit answered, "I will not remove for you. I have my commission from Christ to tarry and vex this family." The minister answered, "A permission thou hast indeed, but God will stop it in due time." The devil replied, "I have, sir, a commission which perhaps will last longer than your own." The minister died. In the year 1655, in December, the devil had told them that he had given his commission to Tom to keep. The company inquired at the lad, who said there was something put into his pocket, but it did not tarry. He's saying that something was put into his pocket, but it didn't stay there. So, do we not find out what the thing was? My nose is so itchy. I'm sorry, like I keep scratching, but had a bit of a cold. After this, the minister and the gentleman arose and went to the place whence the voice seemed to come, to try if they could see or find anything. After diligent search, nothing being found, the gentleman began to say, "We think this voice speaks out of the children," for some of them were in their beds. The foul spirit answered, "You lie. God shall judge you for your lying, and I and my Father will come and fetch you to hell with warlock thieves." And so the devil discharged the gentleman to speak anything, saying, "Let him speak that hath a commission," meaning the minister, "for he is the servant of God." The gentleman, returning back with the minister, sat down near the place whence the voice seemed to come, and he, opening his mouth, spake to them after this manner: "The Lord will rebuke this spirit in his own time, and cast it out." The devil answering said, "It is written in the 9th of Mark, the disciples could not cast him out." The minister replied, "What the disciples could not do, yet the Lord, having heightened the parents' faith for his own glory, did cast him out, and so he shall be." The devil replied, "It is written in the 4th of Luke, and he departed and left him for a season." The minister said, "The Lord in the days of his humiliation not only got the victory over Satan in that assault in the wilderness, but when he came again, his success was no better. For it is written, John 14, 'Behold, the prince of this world cometh, and hath nothing in me, and being now in glory, he will fulfill his promise, and God shall bruise Satan under your feet shortly.'" Romans 16. The devil answered, "It is written," Matthew 25, There were 10 virgins, 5 wise and 5 foolish. And the bridegroom came, and the foolish virgins had no oil in their lamps, and went unto the wise to seek oil. And the wise said, Go and buy for yourselves. And while they went, the bridegroom came and entered in, and the door was shut, and the foolish virgins were sent to hell's fire. What? The minister answered, The Lord knows the sincerity of his servants, and though there be sin and folly in us here, yet there is a fountain open to the house of David for sin and for uncleanness. When he hath washen us and pardoned our sins, for his name's sake, he will cast the unclean spirit out of the land. The devil answered and said, Sir, you should have cited for that place of Scripture the 13th chapter of Zechariah. And so he began at the first verse and repeated several verses, and concluded with those words, In that day I will cause the prophet and the unclean spirit pass out of the land, but afterwards it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered. The minister answered and said, Well are we that our blessed shepherd was smitten, and thereby hath bruised thy head, and albeit in the hour of his sufferings his disciples forsook him. Matthew 26. Yet, now having ascended on high, he sits in glory, and is preserving, gathering in, and turning his hand upon his little ones, and will save his poor ones in this family from thy malice. The minister returning back a little and standing upon the floor, the devil said, I knew not these scriptures till my father taught me them. Then the minister conjured him to tell whence he was. The foul fiend replied that he was an evil spirit come from the bottomless pit of hell to vex this house, and that Satan was his father. And presently there appeared a naked hand and an arm from the elbow down, beating upon the floor till the house did shake again. And also he uttered a most fearful and loud cry, saying, Come up, Father, come up. I will send my Father among you. See, there he is behind your backs. The minister said, I saw indeed an hand and an arm when the stroke was given and heard. The devil said to him, Saw you that? It was not my hand, it was my Father's. My hand is more black in the loof, the palm. Oh, said Gilbert Campbell, that I might see thee as well as I hear thee. Would you see me, says the foul thief. Put out the candle, and I shall come butt the house among you like fireballs. I shall let you see me indeed. Alexander Bailey of Dunragit says to the minister, Let us go ben and see if there be any hand to be seen. The devil answered, No, let him come ben alone. He is a good honest man. His single word may be believed. About this time the devil abused Mr. Robert Hay, a very honest gentleman, with very ill with his tongue, calling him witch and warlock. A little after the devil cries, it seems out of purpose and in a purpose, A witch, a witch! There is a witch sitting upon that roost. Take her away. He meant a hen sitting upon the bake of the house. These things being past, all went to prayer, during which time he was silent. Prayer being ended, the devil answered and said, If the goodman's son's prayers at the College of Glasgow did not prevail with God, my father and I had wrought a mischief here ere now. To which Alexander Bailey of Dunragit replied, Well, well, I see you confess there is a God, and that prayer prevails with him, and therefore we must pray to God and commit the event to him. To whom the devil replied, Yes, sir, you speak of prayer with your broad-lipped hat, for the gentleman had lately gotten a hat in the fashion with broad lips. I'll bring a pair of shears from my father, which shall clip the lips of it a little. Whereupon he presently imagined that he heard and felt a pair of shears going round about his hat, which caused him lift it to see if the foul thief had meddled with it. During this time, fireworks. During this time, several things, but of less moment, passed, as that he would have Tom, a merchant, Rob, a smith, John, a minister, and Hugh, a lawyer, all which in some measure came to pass. As to Janet, the goodman's daughter, he cries to her, Janet Campbell, wilt thou cast me thy belt? Quoth she, What a widdy would thou do with my belt? I would fain, says he, fasten my loose bones close together with it. A younger daughter, sitting busking her puppies, as young girls used to do, being threatened by the fiend that he would ding out her horns, that is, brain her, answered without being concerned, "No, if God be to the fore," and so fell to her work again. The good wife of the house, having brought out some bread, was breaking it to give every one of the company a piece. Cries he, "Gristle Wiley, give me a piece of that hard bread," for so they call their oat cakes. I had gotten nothing this day but a bit from Marret, that is, as they speak in that country, Margaret. The minister said, "Beware of that, for it is a sacrificing to the devil." The girl was called for, and asked if she gave him any hard bread. "No," says she, "but when I was eating my due piece this morning, something came and clipped it out my hand." The evening being now far spent, it was thought fit that every one should withdraw to his own home. Then did the devil cry out fearfully, "Let not the minister go home. I shall burn the house if he go." In many other ways did he threaten. After the minister had gone forth, Gilbert Campbell was very instant with him to tarry, whereupon he returned, all the rest going home. When he came into the house, the devil gave a great gaff of laughter. "You have now, sir, done my bidding." "Not thine," answered the other, "but in obedience to God have I returned to bear this man company whom thou doest afflict." Then did the minister call upon God, and when prayer was ended, he discharged the weaver and all the persons of the family to speak a word to the devil, and when it spake, that they should only kneel down and speak to God. The devil then roared mightily and cried out, "What? Will ye not speak to me? I shall strike the bairns and do all manner of mischief." But after that time no answer was made to it, and so for a long time no speech was heard. Several times hath he beat the children in their beds, and the claps of his loof upon their buttocks would have been heard, but without any trouble to them. While the minister and gentleman were standing at the door, ready to go home, the minister's wife and the good wife were within. Then cried Satan, "Gristle, put out the candle." Says she to the minister's wife, "Shall I do it?" "No," says the other, "for then you shall obey the devil." Upon this he cries again with a louder shout, "Put out the candle." The candle still burns. The third time he cries, "Put out the candle." The candle still burns, and no obedience being given to him, he did so often reiterate these words and magnify his voice that it was astonishment to hear him, which made them stop their ears, they thinking the sound was just at their ears. At last the candle was put out. "Now," says he, "I'll trouble you no more the night." I must insert here what I heard from one of the ministers of that presbytery, who with the rest were appointed to meet at the weaver's house for prayer and other exercises of that kind. When the day came, 5 only met, but before they went in they stood a while in the croft which lays round about the house, consulting what to do. They resolved upon 2 things. First, there should be no words of conjuration used, as commanding him in the name of God to tell whence he was, or to depart from the family, which they thought they had no call from God. Secondly, that when the devil spake, none should answer him, but hold on in their worshipping of God and the duties they were called to. When all of them had prayed by turns, and 3 of them had spoken a word or 2 from the Scripture, they prayed again, and then ended without any disturbance. When that brother who informed me had gone out, one Hugh Nisbet, one of the company, came running after him, desiring him to come back, for he had begun to whistle. "No," says the other, "I tarried as long as God called me, but go in again I will not." After this, the said Gilbert suffered much loss and many sad nights, not 2 nights in 1 week free, and thus it continued till April. From April till July he had some respite and ease, but after he was molested with new assaults, and even their victuals were so abused that the family was in hazard of starving, and that which they eat gave them not their ordinary satisfaction they were wont to find. Their victuals are just their foodstuffs. In this sore and sad affliction, Gilbert Campbell resolved to make his address to the Synod of Presbyters for advice and counsel what to do, which was appointed to convene in October 1655, namely, whether to forsake the house or not. The Synod, by their committee, appointed to meet at Glenluce in February 1656, thought fit that a solemn humiliation should be kept, through all the bounds of the synod, and among other causes, to request God in behalf of that afflicted family, which being done carefully, the event was that his troubles grew less till April, and from April to August he was altogether free, about which time the devil began with new assaults, and taking the ready meal that was in the house, did sometimes hide it in holes by the doorposts, and at other times did hide it under the beds, and sometimes among the bedclothes, and under the linens, and at last it did carry it quite away, till nothing was left there, save bread and water. This minds me of a small passage as a proof of what is said. The good wife, one morning making pottage for the children's breakfast, had the tree plate wherein the meal lay snatched from her quickly. Well, says she, let me have the plate again. Whereupon it came flying at her without any scathe done. 'Tis like if she had sought the meal too, she might have got it, such is his civility when he is entreated. A small homage will please him ere he want all. After this he exercised his malice and cruelty against all persons in bringing them in the night time by stirring and moving the thorough the house. Moving thorough the house? Thorough, Thorow, through the house, so that they had no rest for noise, which continued all the month of August after this manner, after which time the devil grew yet worse, by roaring and terrifying them, by casting of stones, by striking them with staves on their beds in the night time. And upon the 18th of September, about midnight, he cried out with a loud voice, I shall burn the house. And about 3 or 4 nights after, he set one of the beds on fire, which was soon put out without any prejudice except the bed itself. Thus I have written a short and true account of all the material passages which occurred. To write every particular, especially of lesser moment, would fill a large volume. The goodman lived several years after this in the same house, and it seems that by some conjuration or other the devil suffered himself to be put away, and gave the weaver a peaceful habitation. This weaver has been a very odd man that endured so long these marvellous disturbances. So, poltergeist, then, really, isn't it? I mean, it seemed that just answering it and doing things would make it stop. And it's saying that the tree work, so like the tray that she had her things on was tweaked away, but then she's like, give that back, and it's come flying back at her, like, and she's got it again. And it's saying that it had a mind to be civil when entreated, which is like she's saying that it's saying that if she wanted meal, she could have asked it to send her meal, and maybe a bag of meal would have come like flying at her. So I mean, if we're to take it as true, it seems like this prankster spirit could be kind of useful, um, if not as a mere companion and someone to have a lark about the house with, have a few jokes and tell a few anecdotes too, share stories. Um, I don't know. Yeah, but there we go. So that's our Devil of Glenluce, which is quite a famous story in Scotland. Uh, let's see. Having a wee look at the chat again. HR Puffin Stuff was a kids program years and years ago with a hint of puffing something. Aki's is right. I mean, I assume so. If you're saying so, Suzanne, then I'm going to believe you. Aki's, no so much. He has a way about him where not much is often believable. But I'm going to believe that HR Puffin Stuff was a thing. I will have to look it up now because I'm curious. Cheers, Alistair, for having a wee listen in while you're busy. I appreciate that. Thank you. Jack Wilde was in it. Little bits here and there, so I don't remember who was in it. But a pure piet is a term of scorn or censure for a chattering, irresponsible type of person. Comb, tail piet, tell, a talebearer, tell. Okay, that makes sense. The way it's spelled here is Piat as well, but then I's and Y's were fully interchangeable. Y's and E's were fully interchangeable too. Yeah. Cheers, Derek. Appreciate that. Aki's shut it. You know I love you. Right. Our next story here, we have King Duff, the 78th King of Scotland. We'll tell the wee bit about this guy. Though this be well known to all who read our Scots histories, yet it will not be amiss to insert it here, as it's in its own place, for their sake especially who have not heard of it. While the king was about the settling of the country, the 78th King of Scotland, King Duff, is that Duffus? Is this like right after the pits? It might be. So while the king was about the settling of the country and punishing the troublers of the peace, he began to be sore afflicted in his body with a new and unheard of disease, no causes of his sickness appearing in the least. At length, after that, several remedies and cures were made use of to no purpose. A report is spread, the authors whereof being uncertain, that the king was brought to that sickness and trouble by witches. This suspicion arose from an unusual sweating he was under, his body pining and withering away by little and little as his strength failing day by day. And since all his physicians had done their utmost and yet no appearance of recovery, it was supposed his case was extraordinary. Therefore, all men being vehemently intent upon the event, news came to the court that night meetings were kept at Forres, a town in Murray, for taking away the life of the king. This was presently received and believed for the truth, because of course it was, because no other thing did occur for the present more probable. Yes, there's nothing that's more likely than that witches have made the king ill. One trusty and faithful men are presently sent away to one Donald, the governor of the castle there, in whom the king had the greatest trust and confidence. This man, having gotten some knowledge of the business from a certain young wench whose mother was under a bad report of being skilful in his black art, found out and discovered the whole matter. The young heart was taken because she had spoken some words rashly anent the king's sickness, and that within a few days his life would be at an end. Some of the guard being sent found the with some hags, such as herself, roasting before a small moderate fire the king's picture of wax. The design of this horrid act was that as the wax by little and little did melt away, so the king's body, by a continual sweating, might totally decay. The waxen image being found and broken, and those old hags being punished by death, the king did in that same moment recover. Compare this with the first relation, and you will find them jump and agree exactly. No. No, I don't think so. I think it's all nonsense. These people were just people. But they're saying that so a wax effigy of the king's been made. Okay, we're talking voodoo dolls again. So we've got them in wax. By picture, it doesn't mean that it's like a flat picture. It just means a representation. So it was probably like a doll of the king, you know. And they've been holding it at a fire. We're to believe they've been holding it at the fire, letting it melt, and that's why the king's sick. The king's been sick for a while under this sweating disease that no one can cure. I mean, they've checked with the physicians. The physicians are stumped. They don't know what's going on. Then they hear tell some witches doing a thing. Then they go out and apparently find the witches doing this, melting the wax, which is causing them to sweat. How long have they been doing that for? Have they been sat there for however many days this king's been ill? And that wax is hardy wax if they're still at it and it's still melting in front of the fire days on. Like, obviously, that's not the least believable bit of this. But, I mean, come on. Did they maybe just keep renewing it at a new wax model, like, every, what, couple of hours as it melts, you know? Like, maybe it only worked in bits. It's a nonsense. But people were killed on this month. People gave up their lives because of this nonsense. You know, we have to bear that in mind. Like, we can laugh at these absurd little stories, but these absurd little stories killed people. You know, they left families motherless and sisterless, and men got. I think a guy was the first to be got in Scotland. I think he was up there in the church, a bishop or something, and obviously they tarred him as a witch because that was the easiest way to discredit him and have him executed. But then they had to prove witches exist. So, like, he was a witch. Yeah, but how do we know witches exist? Well, because he was one. But there are some amongst you, you know, if you see anyone doing any kind of weird stuff, if your animals get sick or your crops fail, you know, look about you. Who's acting suspicious? Do you think they're maybe a witch? You know, and it's spread for there, really. Next here, we're done with King Duff. My nose is so itchy. Oh my goodness. Terrible. And I think the talking is like making vibrations. And it's making my nose itchy. Sorry. So we have some observable passages of God's providence to a godly minister in giving him full clearness concerning Bessie Graham, suspect of witchcraft. Bessie Graham. Yeah, she was another name that came up a lot in the witch trial histories in Scotland, Bessie Graham, along with Agnes Simpson and Gillis Duncan. These are all famous Scottish witches. It tells us she was apprehended about the end of August 1649 upon some threatening words she had spoken in her drunkenness to John Rankin's wife in Kilwinning. Yeah, you don't want to make yourself an enemy of anybody during the witch trials because you're going to find yourself tagged. Whereupon the poor woman, 10 days after, took sickness and shortly died. You also can't be having those coincidences on the go. No, you're going to be got. That's evidence to them. She was imprisoned in the steeple for the space of 13 weeks, all which time I, the minister, repaired to her, but found her still more and more abjured. In all her discourses, she was so subtle that not only I could get no advantage by her words, but sometimes she made me think that she was an innocent woman, so that I was much grieved for her hard usage, the torture. If it could have been helped and had my own secret wishes, she had never been meddled with. Yea, if she could have made an escape, I being innocent of it, I could have been glad. For I feared much that all we could get proven on her would not have been a sufficient ground for the civil magistrate to give a warrant for putting her to an assize. Or if they had given a warrant, I fear the assize would not condemn her unless I had advised them thereto, wherein I was not clear, so that she should have been set at liberty, and I blamed for it, by reason of my not advising the assize to condemn her. At this nick of time, one Alexander Boggs, skilled in searching the mark, came, being often sent for, and finds the mark upon her ridge back, wherein he thrust a great brass pin, of which she was not sensible, neither did any blood follow. When the pin was drawn out, I looked upon this but as a small evidence in respect of what I found afterwards. Yet this somewhat inclined the judges to send the process to Edinburgh, though there were small hopes of obtaining a commission for putting her to an assize. My fears deceived me, for I was informed that a commission was granted, though with difficulty. But here my strait was augmented, for the chiefest man in the parish refuseth to meet, professing he thought all that was proven on her were but clatters or lies, just chatter. and I was informed that others of the judges did say little less. However, I myself could not but think her guilty, yet if the Assize had put her to it, I was not so clear to advise them, by reason that the things were proven but by one witness. This put me to many thoughts and prayers, wherein I did engage myself to God that if he should find out a way for giving me and the Assize full clearness, either by her own confession or otherwise, I should remark it as a singular favour and special mercy. This resolution I did often reiterate, Lord, make me mindful of it. After a short time, Providence brought to light an unexpected presumption of her guiltiness, which did convince me more than any of the rest. Upon Wednesday, the 28th of November, in the evening, I went to exhort her to a confession, with Alexander Simpson, the kirk officer, and my own servant with me. After labouring with her in vain, we leave her. But when I came to the stairhead, I resolved to halt a little to hear what she would say. Within a very short space, she begins to discourse, as if it had been to somebody with her. Her voice was so low that I could not understand what she said, except one sentence, whereby I perceived she was speaking of somewhat I had been challenging her of, and she had denied. After she had spoken this, after a little while, I hear another voice, speaking and whispering, as it were conferring with her, which presently I apprehended to be the foul fiend's voice, but being uncertain if those who were with me had heard it, so as they could give testimony concerning it, and not daring to ask them, lest she hear our whispering should have spoken no more, I resolved to stand a little longer, she having kept silent a time, upon occasion, as I thought, of some little din amongst us, at our hearing of an uncouth voice. She began to speak again, and before she had well ended, the other voice speaketh as if it were a long sentence, which, though I understood not what it was, yet was so low and ghostly that I was certainly persuaded that it was another voice than hers. Besides, her accent and manner of speaking was as if she had been speaking to some other, and that other voice, to my best remembrance, did begin before she had closed, so that two voices were to be heard at once. By this time, fear took hold on Alexander Simpson, being hindmost in the stair, and thereby he cries out. I did exhort him with a loud voice not to fear, and so we came all of us down the stair, blessing God that hath given me such a clearness in the business. They both who were with me declared they had heard the uncouth low voice both the times. Within a quarter of an hour I go up again, with 2 or 3 able men with me, and brought her down to the school, having placed 6 men to watch, where she remains at the time of my writing hereof. November 30th, obstinate and abjured, and I fear she shall be so to her death. Some special providences I observed in all these. First, that however we knew nothing at our first apprehending of her, but only that she was of a bad report, and had some boasting words to John Rankin's wife, after which she died shortly, yet partly more and more light brake up, until so many presumptions were proven on her as the civil magistrate did judge it equitable to put her to an assize. Second, that Alexander Boggs came and found the mark upon her, at that very nick of time when there was an inclination to let her go free, which, though it did not say much, yet it was a mean to keep her still in prison. 3. That a commission was granted upon more slender grounds than any which had been granted before, and that the Lord kept up the greatest evidence of her guilt until the commission was obtained and the day for the assize appointed. Fourthly, that the commission being granted, I was in a great strait what to do, no less being presented to me than her blood guiltiness, if I should advise to condemn her in the sparing of an enemy to God, if I should not advise. This made the mercy in giving me so full clearing the more acceptable. Fifth, that God did make all other means misgive which I did use, until he should clear me by these, wherein more of himself was soon. Sixth, that before he gave me clearing, I was made to engage myself to a special observation of his most remarkable providences towards me. Seventh, that I had often thoughts to use these means for trying her, by going to watch in the night, if I could hear the devil and her conferring together, but was always hindered, until this time, having no such resolution when I was coming out from her, but only a present purpose to stand but a little, not thinking to hear anything of this kind, and if she had not presently begun to speak, I would have gone away. 8. That I myself was present at the hearing of their conference. If it had been any other, I would neither have been so fully satisfied myself, nor yet others who should hear of it. Ninth, that not only I, but two with me did hear also, which will make a legal proof. 10th, that I was borne up with courage, all the time acting faith in God, that the foul spirit should not have power to do us harm, though he was so near unto us. 11th, that I heard as much as did give full clearing that it was another voice, though I could not get any of the words understood, the Lord thinking it sufficient to loose me out of my strait, though he would not satisfy my curiosity. 12th, though I could not get all the words understood, yet there was as much evidence as made it clearly appear it was another voice than hers. At first, that we heard twice, and 2, that 3 of us did speak. 3, that I was encouraged, and so my judgment not jumbled by any fearful apprehension. 4, that the accent and way of her discourse, and in what we did understand of it, was not after the manner how one regrets a thing to himself, but of one conferring with another. 5, that the other voice was to my certain hearing of a different accent from hers, so hollow and ghostly that it was as easy to me to put a difference between them in the meantime as between the voice of a man and the voice of a child. 6, that to my best remembrance the uncouth voice began before she ended, so that 2 voices were to be heard at once. Lastly, Alexander Simpson understood their language, and afterward did depone the words judicially. It is good, 1, for folk to hold on in doing of duty, though they foresee insuperable difficulties before they come to the end of it. Let a man go on till he come to the difficulty, and here he come that far on, God will remove it. 2, it's good in asking mercies to engage the heart to some duties of thankfulness upon the granting of them. 3, how zealous is the devil to get souls damned, that though he be of an excellent substance, of great natural parts, long experience and deep understanding, yet he will so far enslave himself to poor miscreant bodies as to be ready at their call to discourse and keep company with them, that the last he may get them. 4, how serviceable and trusty soever the devil seems to be unto witches, yet he cares not to ensnare them at the last, for he could not but know that we were waiting on to hear him and her, so that on purpose he hath entered in discourse with her, that she might be taken in the grin. So he's saying that the devil is surely going to have known that they were stood there listening, so he's done that on purpose to really seal her fate. I come to some other remarkable passages concerning Elizabeth Graham before her death, giving evidence that she was most guilty of witchcraft, though she died obstinate and would not confess. Upon Saturday night, November the 13th, she seemed to incline to a confession and promised to William Watt to tell me tomorrow after sermon all that was in her heart, at which time I had none with me but William Watt. When I spake to her, she regretted her misspent time, but especially her malice towards myself, which she affirmed the devil tempted her to. All which time she spake with a very low voice, that although I desired her to speak out, we could scarcely hear her. Whereupon I inquired the reason why she was not able to speak louder. She replied that when she set herself to speak anything that was for her soul's good, she doth not get spoken. These were her words. But if she would scold and flight as she used to do, the devil would give her strength enough to speak as loud as ever she did. Within a little I posed her, if she was guilty of witchcraft. She stareth with her eyes by me, first to the one side, then to the other, at which time I think certainly she saw the devil. For immediately after she began to rail upon me, although she had confessed her malice at me was partly the cause of her greatest grief, and still as she went on in railing, her voice became stronger and stronger, till at last she spake as loud ever she did. Upon Monday before before noon she was most bitter in her language. I posed her what grounds of confidence she had if it would be well with her soul. She answered she had no grounds yet, for she had lived a wicked woman and had not yet repented. But she hoped she would get heaven and get repentance and a change wrought in her, and I thought she was to live but a short while. She was sure of it, and that I would soon see it. I thought in the meantime she had spoken in her rage, but after I perceived the devil, and she had a further design in it, as appears by what follows. That same day afternoon they came and told me that she had fallen to pray, and had many gracious words expressing her own vileness, and the sense she had of God's mercy, and with tears, in which strain she continued till after supper. I came then to see her, at which time she was continuing still as before in egreging her sin and guilt, and shewing her hopes of salvation, and her desire to die. And all along she had such pithy expressions in Scripture so often and plentifully cited, that I was put to wonder, considering that I had ever found her altogether ignorant of the grounds of religion, both before and after she was put into prison. After I had wondered at it a while, without speaking to her, considering what she had foretold so confidently before noon, I concluded in my own mind that it was a draught between the devil and her to fenzy repentance in such an odd way. Fenzy, I assume that's feign, where the Z would be a yaw. To feign repentance in such an odd way that we might be deceived, being made to think that she was not a witch, else she would confess it, seeing God had given her repentance. Whereupon I, seriously considering the matter, opposed her of guiltiness. She confessed all the particulars of the process, which did not certainly conclude her to be a witch, but for the rest of the particulars she denied, as also the crime of witchcraft itself. However, she said she knew she would die, and desired not to live, and she thought we would be free before God of her blood, because that, however she was free, yet there were so many things deponed against her, that though it was hard for us to think otherwise of her than we did, yet she knew well enough her own innocency. Thus I have written all these particulars as I found them in the authentic record written by the minister's own hand. She was soon after executed, and died without any acknowledgment of witchcraft. Another one looking to have their life ended because she had been tagged a witch, and they'd kept her so long, because if you're not confessing, can't do anything with you other than continuing trying to get a confession out of you. But there you're seeing that there were times when they were executed even without confessing. If they felt that they had enough proof, they didn't need a confession. And obviously they felt like they had enough proof of her because they heard a second voice speak in her cell. You know, right? We know this is a farce. We know that witchcraft was a fallacy, that it was idiocy. The witch hunts were a crime. They were a social crime against people that weren't super accepted in their communities, people that would maybe get drunk and say a word to someone else's wife, and then that wife is going, screw it, we're having her as a witch. She's our witch now, you know, like she says bad words to me, so kill her, because that's obviously justice, you know. We're going to go in for another break, maybe 5 minutes, and I will be back with more relations of witchcraft and ghosty goodness from the Scottish History Annals. So I shall see you. And we're back. Okay, who's with us? Reagan Elite and Pedulous have joined us. Evening. Thank you for your pledge, Suzanne. I got a notification there on my break. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you very much. We're now on to Anent Hatterick, an old warlock. Anent really just means about. It just means about, anent, a thing. So let me do a thing. I don't want notification noises happening. Folk on Discord. So Anent Hatterick, an old warlock. This man's name was Sandy Hunter, who called himself Sandy Hamilton, and it seems was called Hatterick by the devil, and so by others as a nickname. Nickname is a name given to you by Old Nick, the devil. That was a nickname. He was first a neat herd in East Lothian to a gentleman there. He was much given to charming and curing of men and beasts by words and spells. His charms sometimes succeeded, sometimes not. On a day herding his kine upon a hillside in the summer time, the devil came to him in form of a mediciner and said, Sandy, you have too long followed my trade and never acknowledged me for your master. You must now take on with me and be my servant, and I will make you more perfect in your calling. Whereupon the man gave up himself to the devil and received his mark with his new name. After this, he grew very famous through the country for his charming and curing of diseases in men and beasts, and turned a vagrant fellow like a jockey, gaining meal, flesh, and money by his charms. Such was the ignorance of many at that time. Whatever house he came to, none durst refuse Hatterick an alms, rather for his ill than his good. One day he came to the Yate of Samuelston, Yate, remember, is gate, when some friends after dinner were going to horse. A young gentleman, brother to the lady, seeing him, switched him about the ears, saying, You warlock carl, what have you to do here? Whereupon the fellow goes away grumbling, and was overheard to say, You shall dear buy this ere it be long. This was damnum minutum. The young gentleman conveyed his friends a far way off, and came home that way again, where he supped. After supper, taking his horse and crossing Tyne Water to go home, he through a shadowy piece of haw, commonly called the Allers, and the evening being somewhat dark, he met with some persons there that begat a dreadful consternation in him, which for the most part he never revealed. This was malum secutum. When he came home, the servants observed terror and fear in his countenance. The next day he became distracted and was bound for several days. His sister, the lady Samuelstown, hearing of it, was heard to say, Surely that knave Hatterick is the cause of his trouble. Call for him in all haste. When he had come to her, Sandy, says she, what is this you have done to my brother William? I told him, says he, I should make him repent his striking of me at the Yate lately. She giving the rogue fair words and promising him his pock full of meal with beef and cheese, persuaded the fellow to cure him again. He undertook the business, but I must, says he, first have one of his sarks, which was soon gotten. A sark is like a shirt. What pranks he played with it cannot be known, but within a short while this gentleman recovered his health. When Hatterick came to receive his wages, he told the lady, Your brother William shall quickly go off the country, but shall never return. She, knowing the fellow's prophecies to hold true, caused her brother make a disposition to her of all his patrimony, to the defrauding of his younger brother George. After that, this warlock had abused the country for a long time. He was at last apprehended at Dunbar and brought into Edinburgh and burnt upon the castle hill. I have insert this story, which I had from the gentleman's own brother, a thing well known at that time through the country, not so much for any great matters in it, as that it may be an occasion to me to speak a little of charms. The word charm or incantation comes from the Latin word carmen, signifying a verse because the Roman soothsayers gave their charms in verse. It is only a strange composure of words to blind the understanding of people, pretending that by virtue of words great matters may be brought to pass. But words of themselves, either spoken or written, as these charms, have no force to bring anything to pass. It is only the power of Almighty God. Charming is much practiced by the Pope and the Romish Church, their whole form of religion, both in private and in public, consisting of charms of all sorts. Pope Leo had a charm, which he said he had from an angel, who taught him that whosoever carried that charm and writ about him, and said every day 3 paternosters, 3 aves, and 1 creed, shall not that day be conquered of his enemies, nor be in other danger, ghostly or bodily, but shall be protected by these holy names of Jesus Christ, written with the 4 evangelists and crosses between them as Jesus, Christus, Messias, Soter, Emmanuel, etc. It is still a common practice among the papists to carry charms about them to make them shot free when they go to war, as also hath been found by experience in the late Irish wars, many of the idolatrous Irish being found with charms in their pockets composed by the popish clergy. They make their holy water by a charm or conjuration thus: I conjure thee, thou creature of water, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, that thou drive the devil out of every corner of this church and altar, so that he remain not within our precincts, which are just and holy. This is used in the dedication of their churches. Thus, by holy water, they not only conjure the devil from their churches, but from dwelling houses, from meat and drink, from salt upon the table. They dedicate their bells and steeples, which have power to clear the air from devils. It is likewise a sort of charm, which many witches are prescribed, namely to cut the rowan tree between the 2 Beltane days. If any man or woman, horse or cow, shall have a piece thereof upon them, no devils or fairy shall have power to meddle with them. An old woman whom I read of used this charm when she went to bed. Okay, so here we have an allusion to why witchcraft became a thing, why charms and superstitions became something to avoid and be against at the time it did. Now, if you think that the witch trials, the witch hunts, started in the 16th century, about start to the mid 16th century, a little bit later in Scotland, the mid to second half of the 16th, what also happened about that time? You had the Reformation, you had the Protestants coming in and saying that Catholicism was the incorrect way to praise their God, that the religion, which had been universal, Catholic is literally translated to mean universal. It's gone from being a universal religion believed and practiced by the majority of the known world. And in the mid 16th century, in Europe, we had the rising of the reformers and the Protestant version of Christianity, if you like. So they were railing against the ostentatiousness, the fact that they were chanting as if they would be making spells, etc., in their usual Sabbath sermons in the Catholic churches, and they considered that Catholicism should now be seen as nothing more than superstition and doing things for superstition's sake, much in the way that someone with OCD might have to turn on a light switch 3 times to prevent harm from coming to someone, some kind of perceived ill happening. they felt like that's what all Catholics were doing, that they were going to their church, they were reciting their rotes, they were indulging in the ostentatious wealth of the churches, the priests were fat and well fed, they saw that there was gluttony and excess within the Catholic Church. So the Catholics, the Protestants were told, see them as superstitious, and superstition is bad. We should be more enlightened than that as a people. So then you see here that you have the Satan linked to the charms and chantings of the Catholic religions and the Catholics within their religious spaces. Now, there is something that it reminds me of, and it was an article from the Scots Lore, which was 1895. It was one of the first books that I uploaded to this. In fact, it was the first book I uploaded to the site. There you go. And there's an article entitled Feeble Amulets, which seems to be weirdly popular. It gets quite a lot of traffic. I'm not entirely sure why, but I will show you these. So here's feeble amulets, and really what reminded me of these was the fact that there were crosses between every word, you know. And here they try and work out a lot of these, and it seems to be charm rings. And this word feeble seems to come up in amongst other various feeble and thanks. So they're called feeble amulets because this word appears so often. But you would have crosses between, and that's what they're talking about there, is having crosses between every word of the charm. So I feel like that's what these are. These rings, these feeble amulets, are really what this gentleman's talking about here when he's talking about the charms that were worn by the Catholics in order to assuage evil, to keep Satan away, you know. And they weren't round, they seem to have been these many-sided rings. Often there's a so I've only seen pictures of them. I'll need to go looking. I've seen some of the amulets too, which are like balls, maybe like a crystal, some kind of semi-precious gem fashioned into a ball, and it's got 4 bands around it to seal it in, and the bands have the words and crosses on them. So yeah, I feel like that's what this is. Um, So he ends this chapter by saying, "It is likewise a sort of charm which many witches have prescribed, namely to cut the rowan tree between the 2 Beltan days. If any man or woman, horse or cow shall have a piece thereof upon them, no devils nor fairies shall have power to meddle with them. An old woman whom I read of used this charm when she went to bed. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the bed be blessed that I lie on. Another old woman taught her neighbour this charm when the butter would not churn. Come, butter, come, butter, come, butter, come. Peter stands at the gate waiting for a buttered cake. Come, butter, come." And apparently that'd do the job. So there you go. So your fairies and all of the supernatural creatures, kelpies and glastigs and what have you, were now seen to be creatures of the devil, that anything supernatural or in any way superstitious was to be avoided because that would get you in league with Satan to some extent. Now, the next relation we have is touching Isabel Harriet, which is another name from the books. Some may have heard of Isabel Harriet from previous witchy articles, etc. This woman was born at Peaston in the parish of Ormiston, and was for several years a very useful servant to the minister there for all manner of outhouse work. She was of low stature, small and slender of body, of a black complexion. Her head stood somewhat awry upon her neck. She was of a drolling and jeering humour, and would have spoken to persons of honour with great confidence. After several years' service, the minister began to dislike her, especially upon the account of her not profiting in the knowledge of God, she having so much opportunity and occasion to know and learn. Therefore she was put away, and went to some other service for a long time, after which she returned to Ormiston town, and was sometimes haunting the minister's house, but without his knowledge. She took sickness about the beginning of winter 1680, and about the time of her death her face became extremely black. Within 3 or 4 nights after she was buried, one Isabel Murray, relic, again widow, of William Craig, the kirk officer, saw her apparition about 12 o'clock at night, in her white robes upon her, such as she was put into her coffin with, walking from the chapel towards the minister's looping on stone, where, according to her custom when she was alive, she halted a little while with her elbow leaning upon it. After this she observed her to walk in at the minister's back gate toward the stable. We have only the bare testimony of this one woman for it. Within some few nights after, there was a throwing of stones over the minister's house, and some thrown at the hall door and windows. The stones were found in the close the next morning, where they lighted, and fell softly for the most part. The minister coming in one night, against whom the devil's malice chiefly was, at the back door, and shutting it after him, had a great stone cast after him, which hit the door very smartly, and left a mark and impression behind it. This she did, or rather the devil, in imitation of a prank she had played while she was alive, for the minister having caused the other servants thrust her out at the same door, she threw a great stone at it with violence out of wrath and anger. The foresaid Isabel Murray, coming out of the minister's house one night, or going into it, was hit very sharply with a stone upon her back. The servant man that kept the horses, after he had been at his devotion, was going into his bed in the stable, was by somewhat gripped by the heel, to his great amazement. He giving a great and loud cry, the mistress of the family and others came into the stable, and found the lad under a great affrightment. This night several clods and stones were thrown, but no person touched. One thing remarkable was that an old horse comb, which had been a wanting for several years, was thrown at the lad's bedstead with great violence, yet wronged no body. The horses would have been found the next morning standing and lying disorderly, and sometimes all in a great sweat. While this servant man had been dressing the garden, he had found several stones thrown at him, but was never touched, save by one, which hit him very favourably. How does a stone hit you favourably? The house was sometimes troubled within with some small noise and din. One time there was a burning coal thrown under one of the beds. One of the family upon a night had his nightcap taken off his head in the bed, and found the next morning full of cinders and ashes lying under the chimney. If the devil could have done more, surely he would have done it. This is the most part of the trouble which the family met with, which continued for 8 or 9 weeks, not every night, but now and then, during which time frequent and fervent prayers were sent up to God by those of the family and others out of it, which wanted not success. There was much talking of this ghost, and things spoken rashly, and some out of malice did invent lies and untruths. One jeeringly said, "Now let the minister and his brethren with all their prayers drive away the devil." 'Tis very remarkable that after that time there was no more trouble found about the family. For what follows, we have only the simple word of the foresaid Isabel Murray, who, coming home from the church between sermons, to the town of Ormiston to visit her house in Kale Yard, for fear vagrant cows had come over the dyke, and going down her yard, she saw in the minister's yard, being next adjacent, the apparition of Isabel Harriet. In that same very habit she was laid into her coffin with. Never was one egg liker to another than this apparition was like to her, as to her face, her stature, her motion, her tongue and behaviour, as like was the devil to her as Apollo was to old Butes, whom Virgil excellently describes in the ninth book of his Aeneid, bringing him down from heaven to wait upon Ascanius. I'll not bother with the Latin. It translates as Apollo went, and from the heaven descends, and in all Butes form to Ascanius bends. In all points, like the old man, still he went, whom then to wait on one's son Aeneas sent. Such his white hair, complexion, and his voice, and dreadful arms rating with mighty noise. Okay, I assume it's dreadful arms being weaponry. Her face, said the woman, was black like the mutton soot, one of her own expressions, the very colour which her face had when she died. She saw her walking under the fruit trees and over the beds where the seeds had been sown, bowing her body downwards, as if she had been seeking somewhat off the ground, and saying to herself, "A stain, a stain," for so she pronounced the words, for she had gathered a considerable number of small stones in her lap, which the woman saw her throw down at a bush root near to the foot of the yard. Some may apprehend that these were the stones which she frequently cast in the night time. This woman, seeing her, says with very great confidence, "Wow! What's thou doing here, Isabel Harriet? I charge thee by the law thou lives on to tell me." See the like expression. She replies, or rather the foul fiend in her likeness, "I am even come again because I wronged my master, while I was his servant, for it was I that stealed his shekel." This was a Jewish shekel of gold, which with some other things had been stolen from him several years before, which I hid under the hearthstone in the kitchen, and then when I flitted, took it into the Canongate, and did offer to sell it to a Frenchwoman who lodged where I served, who asked where I got it. I told her I found it between Leith and Edinburgh. "One night," says she, "I was riding home late from the town, and near the head of Fawside Brae the horse stumbled, and I said, 'The devil raise thee,' whereupon the foul thief appeared presently to me, and threatened me, if I would not grant to destroy my master the minister, he would throw me into a deep hole there, which, I suppose, is yet remaining, or if I could not get power over my master, I should strive to destroy the schoolmaster." It was very remarkable that one of the minister's servant women had given to the schoolmaster's servant woman some linens to make clean, among which there was a cross cloth of strong linen, which could never be found, though diligent search was made for it, till one morning the master awakening found it bound round about his nightcap, which bred admiration both to himself and his wife. No more scathe was the devil or the witches able to do him. What way this was done, or for what end, it cannot be well known, but it is somewhat probable that they designed to strangle and destroy him in the night time, which is their usual time in working and doing of mischief. This happened about the time, I suppose, that the devil had charged Isabel Harriet to destroy this honest man. Yet within 2 days a young child of his, of a year old, fell sick, which was quickly pulled away by death, none knowing the cause or nature of the disease. But I proceed. She confessed likewise how the devil met with her a second time at Elphiston Hill, within a quarter of a mile of Ormiston, and told what the devil did to her. "And," says she, "I was coming home one night from Haddington Market with horse corn, and met with the devil at Knockhills, who bade me destroy Thomas Anderson, who was riding with me, and because I refused, he threw the horse corn off the horse. This Thomas Anderson was a Christian man. It is well remembered yet that she went the next morning timorously and brought home her oats, which had lain there all the night. And moreover," says she, "I cheated my master when I went to the market to buy oats, for I made him believe I gave more money for the ball than I did. And do not you remember, Isabel Murray, that one night you coming out of the minister's house got a sore knock upon the back with a stone? "It was I, but it was not for your own sake, but for your goodman's sake, Willie Craig, who threw me one day into the jaw hole and abused me." She told this woman likewise that she would fain have spoken a word with her master. After this conference, the woman began to be feared and came running home in haste. During all this time, there was no person in the family that met with any hurt or scathe or saw anything. Such was the Lord's kindness to them all. One Isabel Elliot, a witch, confessed to the minister that many nights his house and yard would have been beset with witches. The same woman asked the devil one time why they could not get amends of him. He told her he was locked up. This woman, Isabel Harriet, was never reputed a witch, nor delated by any for witchcraft. Some jeeringly would have called her so. She was indeed ignorant of religion, notwithstanding of the excellent opportunities she had for gaining knowledge. Next, her riding and travelling from far places in the country in the night, as well as in the daytime, and coming home late without fear, and her stunkered and ill nature bred suspicion. If she had confessed a compact with the devil before her death, it might have been a good ground, but this trouble happening to the family immediately after her death, and her apparition being seen, gave all occasion to say she was a witch. But these things do not infallibly conclude. But what could her apparition be? It behoved either to be her real body informed and acted by the devil, for her soul could not be brought back, or only the devil taking upon him her shape and form, acting and imitating her to the life, which is more probable. I have adventured to publish this without his knowledge, presuming so much upon his goodness and love of truth and useful instruction of the world, though I should displease his own humour, whilst haply I may, upon his better consideration, gratify some more noble principle in him, for I know nothing in the thing that can turn to his dishonour. For the best of men and families have suffered from the devil in extraordinary ways, and it has been their glory that by their faith and courage and confidence in the arm of God they have overcome him. If I have erred in some circumstances or in any other thing, I am to be excused, since I was not an eyewitness, and what I have written anent the apparition was most part from the woman's own mouth. He says that it had to be a devil that was acting as her ghost because, of course, her spirit can't be brought back. And I did watch something about the kind of history of how we see ghosts, that we see them as ethereal and kind of floating almost, because of the phantasmagoria shows that they had when cinema first occurred. People would go to these small shows, and it was realized quite quickly that because of long exposure time, if someone was in the picture and left, it would create an image of them, a ghostly image of them. And that technique was used by photographers doing ghost photos of people, spirit pictures of people. Um, and for these shows, these phantasmagoria, and when the ghosts were depicted like as being obviously projected, so they're up and they're almost transparent because the exposure is not taken and they're floating off the ground. You're not seeing that. That's become how we inherently think a ghost looks, is from the Victorian era, which is interesting. But there you go. He's saying that ghosts of people, according to him in his time in the 17th century, that ghosts can't exist unless they're demons or Satan, or a minion of Satan, because human spirits have a place to go thereafter. They're either going down to get the seven shades of beaten out of them, or they're going up to enjoy bliss forever, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, they did have a ghost, and that was the story of it. But they're not for believing it's her, and that's fine. That's okay. The next story we have is Touching one William Barton, a warlock. About 30 years ago, more or less, there was one William Barton apprehended for witchcraft. His confession was first that if he had 20 sons, he would advise them to shun the lust of uncleanness. For, said he, I never saw a beautiful woman, maid nor wife, but I did covet them, which was the only cause that brought me to be the devil's vassal. One day, says he, going from my own house in Kirkliston to the Queen's Ferry, I overtook in Dalmeny a young gentlewoman, as to appearance beautiful and comely. I drew near to her, but she shunned my company, and when I insisted, she became angry and very nice. Nice had slightly different meanings back in the day. Said I, since we are both going one way, be pleased to accept of a convoy. At last, after much entreaty, she grew better natured, and at length we came to that familiarity, that she suffered me to embrace her, and to do that which the Christian ears ought not to hear of. At this time I parted with her very joyful. The next night she appeared to him in that same very place, and after that which should not be named, he became sensible that it was the devil. Here he renounced his baptism and gave up himself to her service, and she called him her beloved, and gave him this new name of John Baptist, and received the mark. She likewise bestowed £15 Scots upon him in the name of Tocher Good, and so parted. Tocher in Scots was the woman's dowry when she married. A tocher was taken. £15. That was a lot. This is 30 years ago, so this is mid 1600s. He's going to have felt very rich after leaving her. After he had gone a little way off, she calls him back and gave him a merk piece in good and sufficient money, which she bade him spend at the ferry, and desired him to keep entire and whole the £15, which he declared was real and true money. He confessed that they never met together, but they played their pranks. After this confession, he begged liberty to sleep a little, which the judges granted to him. After he had slept a short time, he awakened with a great laughter. The judges inquired the reason. He replied, being seriously urged, that the devil had come to him and rebuked him with anger and threatened him most furiously that he had confessed, and bade him deny all, for he should be his warrant. After this, he turned obdurate, and would never to his dying hour acknowledge anything, for the devil had persuaded him, even from his first engaging, that no man should take his life, which promise he firmly believed to the very last. When they told him in the prison house that the fire was built, and the stake set up, and the executioner coming to bring him forth, he answered he cared not for all that, for, said he, I shall not die this day. But the executioner got presently orders to lead him forth, and he, stepping in at the prison door, in an instant shot to dead, as they say, and never stirred again. In this strait they appointed the executioner's wife to strangle him, which she did willingly, a reward being promised to her. When the warlock heard this, that a woman was to put him to death, "Oh," cries he, "how hath the devil deceived me! Let none ever trust to his promises." All this was done at Kirkliston before famous witnesses. The executioner's name was Andrew Martin, and his wife's name Margaret Hamilton, who, when her husband died, clapped her hands and cried often, "Dole for this parting, my dear bird Andrew Martin." This Barton's wife had been likewise taken with him, who declared that she never knew him to have been a warlock before, and he likewise declared that he never knew her to have been a witch before. She confessed that malice against one of her neighbours, moved her to engage in the devil's service. She renounced her baptism and did prostrate her body to the foul spirit, and received his mark and got a new name from him, and was called Margaratus. She was asked if ever she had any pleasure in his company. "Never much," says she, "but one of a rough tanny dog playing on a pair of pipes, The spring he played, says she, was the silly bit chicken, gar cast it a pickle, and it will grow meikle. And coming down the hill when he had done which done which was the best sport, he carried the candle in his bottom under his tail, which played a wig wag wig wag. She was burnt with her husband. It's just nonsense. The idea that any of this was it was a more credulous age. We'll give them that. There is one thing remarkable in this story, that he bestowed so much money upon the warlock, which proved good and sufficient coin. 'Tis seldom he is so liberal, but surely he would be more liberal if the Lord would suffer him to steal or make use of treasures lying hid in the ground or in the bottom of the sea. If this liberty were granted, he might deceive the most part of men and women in the world with his gifts. The next relation shall be in confirmation of this. Maybe. Just mental. Just mental. Yeah. A dog was playing tunes and he had a candle up his butt and his tail was singing. Like, 'cause of course. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to take these stories seriously. They are super serious. You know what I mean? Again, these were people's lives that were on the line. These are super serious, but they are so ridiculous. It's just mental. Our next relation is anent an apparition seen in Gladsmuir with some other gleanings. I find among some of my notes written in the year 1666 that Richard Chaplin and his brother George, both of them merchants in Haddington, coming home late from Edinburgh upon a Saturday night, being the 4th of November 1666, and riding off the muir at a place called the 2 Mile Cross, within 2 miles of their own home, saw 4 men in grey clothes and blue bonnets standing round about a dead corpse, laying swaddled in a winding sheet. Their dog was so feared that he durst not go forward, but came running back among their horses' feet. The one brother is yet living, a sober and Christian man who can attest this. If I have varied, it is only in some small circumstance, which doth not alter the thing itself. It is the more remarkable because it was about 20 days before Rullion Green. There was one Alice Duke, an Englishwoman, that was taken in 1664 and confessed before the judges that after their meetings all the witches make very low obeisances to the devil, who appears in black clothes and a little band. He bids them welcome at their coming and brings them wine, beer, cakes, and meal, or the like. He sits at the higher end, and usually Anne Bishop sits next to him. They eat, drink, dance, and have music. At their parting, they used to say, "Merry meet, merry part," and that before they are carried to their meetings. Their foreheads are anointed with greenish oil that they have from the devil, which smells raw. They, for the most part, are carried in the air. As they pass, they say, "Tout, tout, a tout, tout," throughout and about. Passing back, they say, "Rentum, tormentum," and another word which she does not remember. I read of an old gentleman, an excellent justice of peace, who did always dispute against the immorality of the soul, the immortality of the soul. That makes a difference, and its distinction from the body and of the existence of spirits. No reason could convince him but palpable experience. He, being a bold man and fearing nothing, used all the magical ceremonies he could to raise the devil or a spirit, and had a most earnest desire to meet with one, but never could do it. But while his servant is one night drawing off his boots in the hall, some invisible hand gave him such a clap in the back that it made the hall ring again. He went immediately to his field to try if any spirit had called him to converse with him, but found none. When neither rhyme nor reason could persuade him that there were spirits, says the gentleman that debated with him, "Well, well, do you remember the clap you received your back of one night?" "Yes," said he. "Assure yourself," said the other, "that goblin will be the first that will welcome you into the other world." Upon this his countenance changed most sensibly, and was more confounded with this than with all the philosophical or rational arguments that could have been brought against him. No one wants to see a goblin once they die. We like goblins. There was one Julian Cox, an English woman apprehended for witchcraft. The first that deponed against her was an huntsman who swore that he going out with a pack of hounds to hunt a hare, did start one not far from Julian Cox, her house. The dogs hunted her very close, and the third ring hunted her in view, till at last the huntsman, perceiving the hare almost spent, and making towards a great bush, he ran on to the other side of the bush to take her up and preserve her from the dogs. But as soon as he laid hands on her, it proved to be Julian Cox, who had her hands grovelling on the ground, and her globs, as he expressed it, upwards. He, knowing her, as was so frightened that his hair on his head stood on end. She was out of breath so that she could not speak. The dogs came up and smelt her, but did no more. This narrative, saith my author, hath the most authentic confirmation that human affairs are capable of sense and the sacredness of an oath. Ah, well, it must be completely true then. So this woman was a hare, and he's going to grab the hare, and the hare is turned into the woman with her, what did it say? And her globs upwards. I assume that's her buttocks. Yeah, okay, true story. Like, why not? It was obviously true. It had the sacredness of an oath about it. The next relation we have is anent one Spalding in Dalkeith. Dalkeith's a good place. We've got about the time that the Earl of Traquair was His late Majesty's Commissioner in Scotland. It happened at Dalkeith, where he resided, that one Spalding, a townsman, killed his neighbour, one Sadler. The murderer fled and absented himself for a year and more, yet sometimes came home in the night time, finding that no man pursued him. After he had been wearied of this way of living, he resolved to cast himself upon the Commissioner's mercy. He coming one day near to the town of Dalkeith in coach, Spalding came in a most humble manner and prostrated himself before him and begged mercy. The Commissioner inquired what the business was. The servants told him he was such a man that had killed his neighbour, a townsman. Thereupon he appointed him to be conveyed to prison, where he lay for a year and more. At last an assize found him guilty and appointed him to be hanged. When he heard this sentence, he cried out, "Oh, must I die like a dog? Why was I not sentenced to lose my head?" After he came to the scaffold and prayer was ended, he goes up the ladder, and the rope being put about his neck, he cries with a loud voice in the audience of all, "Lord," says he, "let neither this soul of mine depart from this body till it be reconciled with thee." And having said this, the executioner threw him off the ladder. When he had hung the ordinary time sufficient to take away any man's life, he was cut down, and his body put into a bier and carried to the toll booth to be woon. When they had opened the lid of the bier, the man bangs up, bangs up upon his bottom, and his eyes staring in his head and foaming at the mouth. He made a noise and roared like a bull, striking about him with his fists, to the great consternation of all. The magistrates, hearing of it, gave orders that he should be strangled better. The executioner fell to work, and putting the rope about his neck, stood upon his breast, and strained his neck so hard that it was no bigger about than his wrist, and he continuing after this manner for a sufficient time, was carried to the grave and covered with earth. Notwithstanding all of this, he made such a rumbling and tumbling in it that the very earth was raised, and the mules were so heaved up that they could hardly keep them down. After this, his ghost, which made it after this, his house at the east end of town, as I am informed, was frequented with a ghost which made it stand empty for a long time. Whether any have dwelt in it since, I know not. This I have from a very creditable person, who, being a scholar there at that time, was an eye and ear witness, who is yet alive. That's horrible. That's horrible. He didn't die. So the executioner literally went up onto his chest and got the noose again and strangled it. Are you serious? I assume that was still done in front of everybody. I mean, there's a story of Half Hang It Maggie, and she was hanged for, I think it was concealment of pregnancy and the murder of the child. So she was hanged for that. Concealment of pregnancy was a big crime, you know. There are only certain reasons you're going to conceal a pregnancy for, you know, and none of them are likely to be good, especially in an era when you're supposed to be married to the person you're having kids with, you know. But for whatever reason, she's apparently been found guilty of, I'm sure it was concealment of pregnancy and the murder of the child. She was hanged and she's been cut down, and it's while she's on the cart, uh, on the way to be coffined, I guess. She woke up and she was allowed to live the rest of her life with the moniker Hoff Hang It Maggie. Um, that is horrible. He did not get the same outcome as Maggie. I kind of thought that was the way it was supposed to go, where if they tried to kill you, but you didn't die, was it not supposed to be seen that divine intervention had somehow prevented you from dying and therefore you didn't really have the right to try again? Um, Especially in this case where he's literally, his last words in front of everybody is to God, saying, God, don't let me die until I'm reconciled with you. And then he's not died after he's been hung. And then the executioner's just been told, yeah, no, just strangle him better. I would think that would be seen as divine intervention in this age, but who are we? So we're going to have another final break before we get into relation 30. It'll just be another wee 5 minutes, and we'll be back for the final part. All right? Don't go And we're back for our fourth and final part. We have Anent. Well, we had Anent when Spalding and Dalkeith, didn't we? I'm sure we did. So, the way this is written is crazy. We have next Margaret Wilson. I used to work with a Margaret Wilson. She was lovely. She wasn't much of a witch. Um, I guess if she wanted to be, she could be. But Margaret Wilson, you know who you are, and now so does everybody else. So we have Annette Margaret Wilson. This is a true narrative of what happened to her one night while some persons were attending her. For what passed other nights I cannot relate, since I want information. They say that the gentleman, her uncle in the parish of Galashiels, came one day after sermon to the minister there, Master Wilkie, and told him that the devil was at his house. For, said he, there is an odd knocking about the bed where my niece lies. Whereupon the minister went along with them and found it so. She, rising from her bed, sat down to supper, and from below there was such a knocking up as bred fear to all that were present. This knocking was just under her chair, where it was not possible for any mortal to knock up. Supper being ended, they went all to prayer, and she, rising from her place, went and kneeled down in another place, and there also a knocking was heard below her, even during the time of prayer. When she was put to bed, many persons attending, she fell into a deep sleep. Then her body was so lifted up that many strong men were not able to keep it down. Sometimes her body would have made such a motion in the bed as if something had been gripping her by the feet and pulling her up and down. In the meanwhile, they heard a loud noise scratching upon the feather bed, as with long nails, and likewise the minister affirms that he heard a loud risping at her heart, such as risping irons make upon wood or timber. When she awaked, she told him of many things the devil had been speaking to her, offering her gifts and presents. She was hardly persuaded to pray, nay, could not, when even the words were put into her mouth. The minister desired her to enter into a personal covenant with God, which he drew up, but finding one composed already to his hand in that little treatise called The Christian's Great Interest, he made her subscribe it. When she had done this, the devil persuaded her with many arguments to break it. This was the method the devil observed ordinarily every night during her long trouble. What are you up to, wee man? Nay, you are so cute. You have been so cute. Nay, we're so happy to have you. Yeah, we are. That same night, about 12 o'clock, the minister took her uncle out to his own garden to take a turn or two, and began to bear in upon him the sense of this sore affliction which was upon the family, and exhorted him to reflect upon his ways and consider if he had done anything that had provoked the Lord against him. And particularly he charged him with one thing, whereof there was a loud report. He solemnly protested, and that with dreadful imprecations, he was innocent of that particular which was said of him, and absolutely denied it. Do we know what the thing is? She confessed that she had seen the devil in a man's likeness, but especially once going to church, when he forbade her to go and hear sermon. After much trouble of this kind and much noise and talking, the young woman, being but 12 or 13 years of age, came to Edinburgh and tarried with a friend there, and from thence she went to Leith, where she served a mistress. At last she went to Easter Diddeston, it seems, and married there a husband, with whom she lived some years at the Magdalen Pans, where she died. I do not hear that ever she was molested after. If all the particulars of this business were truly collected, they would amount to a far longer relation than I have set down. What? Okay. And young woman being but 12 or 13 years of age? I think you mean child. Jeez. But, well, she did immediately go and get a job, this 13-year-old. She went off to serve a mistress, didn't she? So children were seen as, like, little adults. I think that was the excuse given behind some of the Renaissance paintings, especially of Jesus, because obviously there was a lot of religious art on the go. The Renaissance was big on religious art, but to draw Jesus and Mary, you had to draw Jesus as a Wayne. He always looked like this little man, you know, I don't know, but it was apparently because they had the view that children were just little adults that just had to be molded into the adult they were going to be, you know. So the moment they could work, they were working. They were helping around the house or doing chores. If you lived on a farm, you were out there dealing with the animals, the crops, and the milking, collecting the eggs, all that nonsense. You know, literally, is if you can walk and you can pick up things, you're in a job in this era. So can't begrudge them that. Our next relation is a short information anent Janet Douglas. Now, Janet Douglas, I was actually told about recently because Aki's, I think, has left for a minute. I think he left the chat, but we went off to Glamis Castle on Monday there, and I was told about Janet Douglas because um, are you guys seeing me? I think my internet is being dodgy. So we'll get into this. A short and Janet Douglas. Are we good again? I'm back. Cheers regularly. I appreciate it. Okay, as long as like you can see, because there's no point in me telling you about a thing if you can't hear about a thing. So we have Janet Douglas, again, who Aki stayed in the car. I was told about Janet Douglas when we went to Glamis Castle on Monday there. So we have initially, like the first article, we have a letter to the author outlining what it is that he's sending them over. We have dated Edinburgh, October the 8th, 1684, the year before this book was published originally, for Mr. Sinclair, the author. Sir, when I was at Glasgow in the summer of 1677, I was desirous to see the dumb girl whom you mention in your first relation. At my first incoming, she declined to entertain discourse, but by friendly expressions, and giving her some money, I gained her. I first inquired anent her parentage. I do not remember, says she, of my parents, but only that I was called by the name of Janet Douglas by all people who knew me. I was kept when I was very young by a poor woman that proved cruel to me by beating and abusing me, whereupon I deserted the woman's house and went a begging. So this probably isn't the same Janet Douglas as I was told about at Glamis Castle, because this doesn't sound like a person that's been born and brought up in a castle. The Janet Douglas at Glamis Castle was accused and found to be a witch. So We have I inquired next how she became dumb. She told me by reason of a sore swelling she took in her throat and tongue, but afterwards by the application of album graecum, which I thought she said she was revealed to me, which I thought said she was revealed to me. I recovered my speech. I asked her how she came to the knowledge of witches and their practices. She answered that she had it only by vision, and knew all things as well this way, as if she had been personally present with them, but had no revelation or information from the voice of any spirit, nor had she any communication with the devil or any spirit of that kind. Only, says she, the devil was represent to me when he was in company with any of the witches, in that same shape and habit he was seen by them. She told me she was altogether ignorant of the principles of the Christian religion, but had some smattering knowledge of the Lord's Prayer, which she had heard the witches repeat, it seems by her vision, in presence of the devil, and at his desire, which they observed, they added to the word art the letter W, which made it run, Our Father which wart in heaven, and made the third petition thus, as on earth, so it may in heaven, by which means the devil made the application of the prayer to himself. I remember that one day there was a woman in the town who had this curiosity to give her a visit, who asked her how she came to the knowledge of so many things, but the young wench shifted her by asking the woman's name. She told her name. Says the other, Are there any other in Glasgow of that name? No, says the woman. Then, said the girl, You are a witch. Says the other, Then are you a devil? The girl answers, The devil doth not reveal witches, but I know you to be one, and I know your practices too. Hereupon the woman run away in great confusion, being indeed a person suspected of witchcraft, and had been some time imprisoned upon that account. Oh, you'd be terrified that you were going to end up back in there. Another woman, whose name was Campbell, had the curiosity likewise to see her, and began to ask some questions at her. The wench, shifting to give her an answer, says, I pray you tell me, where were you yesternight, and what were you doing? And withal, says she, Let me see your arm. She refusing, the landlord laid hold upon the woman with some others of the house, and forced her to make bare her arm, where Janet Douglas shewed them an invisible mark, which she had gotten from the devil. The poor woman, much ashamed, run home, and a little time after she came out and told her neighbours that what Janet Douglas had said of her was true, and earnestly entreated them that they would shew so much to the magistrates that she might be apprehended. Otherwise, the devil, says she, will make me kill myself. But the neighbours, judging her to be under a fit of distraction, carried her home to her house. But early the next morning, the woman was found drowned in the Clyde. Mental health help was not a thing. The girl likewise told me at Glasgow, being then under no restraint, that it was revealed to her she would be carried before the great council at Edinburgh, imprisoned there, and scourged through the town, all which came to pass, for about a year after she was apprehended and imprisoned in the Tolbooth of the Canongate, and was brought before the council, but nothing being found against her, she was dismissed, but thereafter, for several crimes committed within the town of Edinburgh, she was taken again, and imprisoned, scourged, and sent away to some foreign plantation, since which time I have not heard of her. So one of the legal ends you could come to, you could be fined money, you could be jailed. If you weren't able to pay a fine, you'd be jailed for however many days they felt covered the fine. You could be jailed for X amount of time for the crime without being fined, or you could be transported. And transported didn't mean going off to a prison in Australia or Canada or usually southern states in America. Um, it meant that you were going to go and work there along with slaves and other owned humans, you know, and you would have to do that for, it was usually about 7 years transportation, but it could extend to more than that. I think on the third when the Act of Prescription came in, um, the people say it's against the wearing of tartan. It was against wearing of tartan, but it was against any piece of clothing, any article of anything that could be worn that was particularly um, associated with Scotland. So it didn't have to be tartan. It just had to be a piece of apparel that was worn in Scotland that wasn't worn elsewhere, or was more particularly worn in Scotland. You weren't allowed to wear any of that. And the first time you got, it was a fine. The second time you got was jail, and the third time was transportation. For 7 years for not for literally wearing your clothes. Um, so yeah, that happened. So this lassie has obviously not for witchcraft. It says for several other crimes that she's committed in Edinburgh. She's been transported to the plantations. So this relation ends. There are several other remarkable passages of her which I cannot inform you of, which others perhaps may do. Therefore, I shall abruptly break off and say no more, but that I am your affectionate friend. This information I have from a discreet, understanding gentleman who was one of my scholars at Glasgow several years ago. There we go. Now we have Helen Elliot. So this is Anent Helen Elliot, burnt at Culross. Again, it's in a letter form. We have for Mr. Sinclair, dated Edinburgh, October 18th, 1684. Sir, I cannot but much approve your design in publishing Satan's Invisible World Discovered, especially at this time, when there are so many that deny the existence of devils, spirits, and witches, and will credit nothing but what they see with their eyes. I shall inform you with 3 remarkable stories which may be attested by famous witnesses, many of which are yet living. I had the curiosity, when I was a scholar, to pass over from Boristoness to Culross to see a notable witch burnt. She was carried to the place of execution in a chair by 4 men, by reason her legs and her belly were broken by one of the devil's cunning tricks which he played her. This woman was watched one night in the steeple of Culross by 2 men, John Shank, a flesher, and one John Drummond, who being weary went to another room where there was a fire to take a pipe, but to secure her they put her legs in the stocks and locked them, as well as might be. But no sooner were they gone out of the room, but the devil came into the prison and told her he was obliged to deliver her from the shame she was like to suffer for his sake, and accordingly took her out of the stocks, and embracing her carried her out of the prison, at which she, being terrified, made this exclamation by the way, "O God, whither are you taking me?" At which words he let her fall at the distance from the steeple, about the breadth of the street of Edinburgh, where she brake her legs and her belly. I saw the impression and dimple of her heels, as many thousands it did, which continued for 6 or 7 years, upon which place no grass would ever grow. At last there was a stone dyke built upon the place. My second relation shall be of some witches of Boristoness, which were the occasion of much inquiry after them there. Anno 1644, a certain woman in the town came about 8 o'clock in the morning into her neighbour's house after a most furious manner, and assaulted her by scratching her face and pulling the hair out of her head, saying, "Thou traitor thief, thou thought to have destroyed my son this morning, but it was not in thy power." The ship wherein the young man was a sailor had been under a dreadful tempest aft and on, with St. Abb's Head that morning, with the violence of a sea which came in upon the deck. He was cast overboard on this side of the ship, and to the admiration of all, he was cast in upon the deck again upon the other side without harm. This marvellous business being reported about 8 o'clock at night by the mariners when they came ashore, and being compared with what the one woman said to the other that morning, both of them were apprehended, and after their confession were both burnt, many hundreds being spectators, whereof I was one. Well, I'm sure you felt super lucky to be a spectator of that. The last, which is more remarkable, shall be anent the wife of one Goodally, a cooper in the parish of Carron. This woman was about 32 or 33 years of age, a most beautiful and comely person, as was in the country about. She was often filed and delated by many who had been burnt. They told that amongst them all, she was the person whom the devil at their meetings did most court and embrace, calling her constantly my dear mistress, setting her always at his right hand, to the great discontent of his old hags, whom, as they conceived, he now slighted. He was apprehended and committed to prison. At this time there was one James he was she was apprehended and committed to prison. At this time there was one James Fleming, a master of a ship there, a person of great courage, strength, and resolution, who had it insinuate to him by her, when he was exhorting her to confess, that in respect she understood he was to be upon her watch the next night. If she got no deliverance, as she expected, before 1 o'clock in the morning, she should lay her heart open to him before others, at which he, being apprehensive of what might fall out, as indeed he had reason, went to his uncle, a grave and experienced person, who advised him to take all his ship's company, to the number of 14 able men, and keep watch, not forgetting the reading of Scripture and earnest prayer to God. The night was still and calm as a summer's evening, without the least appearance of change, when upon a sudden, at midnight, as James Fleming himself was coursing her to and again, as the custom was, holding her by the hand, I say upon a sudden, a terrible tempest, like a hurricane, came on, which took the roof from the house, to their great consternation, and a voice was heard 3 times calling her by a strange name to come away, at which she made several loops upward, increasing gradually, till her feet were as high as his breast. Sounds like something out of an anime. But he held her by both her arms, and as he used to say when he spoke of it, he betouched himself strongly and earnestly to God, though with great amazement, his hair standing widdershins in his head. And after the third call, he prevailed against the greatest effort which ever he felt, and threw her on the ground, she grovelling and foaming like one having the falling sickness or epilepsy, where she fell into a profound sleep for the space of 2 or 3 hours. When she awaked, she declaimed most bitterly against the devil's treachery and perfidiousness, who had promised to carry her to Ireland before 4 o'clock in the morning, and to touch at Paisley, where she might see her sister in passing. She made a free and full confession, and delated many women, some of them of good repute, who afterwards confessed, and died so. The author of this letter is a person of great honesty and sincerity. From the first sincerity, from the first relation of his, we have an evident insistence that the devil can transport the bodies of men and women through the air. 'Tis true he did not carry her far off, but not for want of skill and power. Neither was he afraid to hear the name of God spoken, but purposing to destroy both the soul and the body of the poor creature, he has pretended so much to excuse himself at her hand. The first story puts me in mind of one Cracha Welch, put in prison in the steeple of Culross, to whom several years ago Mr. Alexander Colville, Justice Deputy, came, a gentleman of great sagacity and knowledge as to witches. He asked if she was a witch. She denied. Dare you hold up your hand and swear that you are not a witch? Yes, sir, said she. But behold, what a remarkable judgment of God come upon her! While she is swearing with her arm lifted up, it became as stiff as a tree, that she could not pull it in again, to the amazement of all that were present. One person yet living there was a witness, and can attest this. The gentleman, seeing the vengeance of God upon her for her wickedness, falls down presently upon his knees, and entreated the Lord in her behalf, who was graciously pleased to hear him. I mean, the vengeance of God made her hand stay up in the air. I mean, if God was actually looking to be revenged against these ne'er do well servants of Satan, Surely he'd have ways of doing that that wouldn't require human intervention. I mean, if they can keep an arm up in there, maybe he can stop a heart, you know? Just a thought. Some are of opinion that the devil cannot raise winds and storms upon the sea and land. This is evident from the last relation in the letter, which puts me in mind of a terrible tempest of wind in the Firth that day when Bessie Fowler was burnt at Musselburgh in May in 1661. The devil, it seems, had promised to her that she should not die at that time, whereupon she, looking out at the prison window, spake very confidently to the folk below, "You think to see me burnt the day, but you will all be deceived. The hurricane did so prevail that in effect everybody suspected that she should not have died that day. The morning and the forenoon were very calm." So there we go. That's our story about Helen Elliot burnt at Culross. We next have Anent one Elizabeth Moody at Haddington. And this is our last story for the night, people. It is very short. You'll be possibly pleased to hear. This woman was a servant to Margaret Kirkwood there, a woman of good repute once, who before her death took some trouble of mind, but upon what account I cannot determine. She made some insinuation, it seems, to some of her friends that she inclined to put hand in herself, whereupon she was attended and waited upon, but had her own liberty to retire herself to private prayer, in which exercise she was frequent. Upon a Sabbath forenoon, when all were at church and she at home, none with her save only a servant maid, she went into some high room or other, as she was wont to do, to her devotion, and there, before the maid could know, she hanged herself. In this very moment of time, this Lisa Moody, her old servant being in church, was observed to number upon her fingers 50 or 51, which number being ended, she cries out with a loud voice in presence of all, "Now the turn is done." She was presently taken away as a distracted person, and news coming to the church that such a woman had hanged herself, her old mistress, she was taken away to prison. But what her confession was, it is not well known. There are many other things reported, whereof I cannot give an account. This tragedy was acted within these few years at Haddington. That woman was at church. She never killed the what? She's committed suicide. But her servant's been done for it. And what is the 50 or 51? I have no idea what the importance or the significance of the numbers 50 or 51. And she observed to number upon her fingers 50 or 51. What does that mean? Was like the numbers suddenly appeared on her skin? Or I have no idea what that means. And on that, we finish. So I appreciate you for joining me. If you stayed from start to finish, you have stamina, and I appreciate you so much. But if you made it into this live stream at all to say hi, then I appreciate you. So I may do this again and possibly more often. I'll see what kind of things in future merit live streams and what format that might take. But it's been fun and I enjoy reading these wee stories. So I hope you enjoyed listening to them. And we may see you for the next one. Take care.